Hey there. Before we begin, you should be in a position that is comfortable to you, and you can let us know in the comments where in the world you are and what is the current time for you. You wake up to the sound of a sunbeam slapping your face, and no, it's not a gentle caress. Welcome to the life of a Pharaoh's servant, where your alarm clock is the sun and your snooze button is non-existent. It's around 4,000 in the morning, and while the Nile River might be serenely carrying its waters downstream, your day is about to become a marathon of sweat and hieroglyphs. Forget about starting your day with a leisurely cup of joe. Coffee won't be discovered for another few millennia. Instead, you're fueled by the sheer terror of missing your morning duties and facing the wrath of your overseer. Now, let's talk attire. You might think you're going to strut around in one of those elegant white linen kilts you've seen in the movies. But unless you've got Pharaoh-level connections, your threads are more like a potato sack's distant cousin. Fashion isn't really your concern, practicality is. Your day starts with a prayer, maybe a quick thank you to the gods that you're not building a pyramid today. Then it's straight to your first duty, taking care of the sacred animals. These creatures are considered earthly incarnations of the gods, so no pressure there, right? One wrong move, and you might as well start packing for the afterlife. In the social hierarchy of ancient Egypt, you're a few rungs above the dirt that gets stuck in the pharaoh's sandals. Sure, you're better off than the slaves, but you're not exactly sipping wine in the royal court either. The population of ancient Egypt was a well-oiled machine, and the pharaoh was the ultimate mechanic. Everyone had a role, and as a servant, yours was to keep things running smoothly, which often meant working your fingers to the bone, literally. Archaeologists have found skeletons of workers with worn-down bones, a testament to the grueling manual labor that filled their days. By now, the sun is fully up, and you're knee-deep in your tasks. Maybe you're in the kitchen, preparing bread and beer, the staples of the Egyptian diet. Bread was the ancient Egyptian equivalent of fast food, though not exactly fast or convenient to make. It was dense, gritty, and sometimes full of sand, which probably did wonders for your dental health. Speaking of which, dental hygiene was not a high priority, and many Egyptians suffered from tooth decay due to their sand-laden diet. So, add keeping your teeth to the list of things you won't be doing as a pharaoh's servant. Meanwhile, beer was practically the drink of the gods, consumed by everyone from peasants to pharaohs. Forget your craft brew, this was more like a thick, porridge-like concoction that you drank through a straw to avoid the floating bits of grain. But hey, at least it was nutritious. And after a few sips, maybe your tasks didn't seem so daunting anymore, or maybe you just didn't care. As the morning drags on, you might find yourself cleaning the living quarters. The pharaoh's palace isn't quite what you'd expect. Sure, it's grand and imposing, but it's also a hotbed of activity, noise, and the occasional political intrigue. The palace was not only a home, but also a bustling center of government. Forget about privacy, even the pharaoh didn't have much of that. You're constantly on the move, sweeping, dusting, and making sure everything is in its rightful place. And you thought Marie Kondo was demanding. Let's take a moment to debunk a common myth, the idea that the pharaoh's servants lived a life of luxury, dining on exotic delicacies and lounging in opulence. In reality, your meals consisted mostly of bread, onions, and maybe some fish if you were lucky. Meat was a rare treat, usually reserved for the higher-ups or special occasions. Your living quarters? Sparse, to say the least. We're talking about a small room with a mat for sleeping and perhaps a small lamp for light. Luxurious, huh? And forget about modern conveniences like running water or a bathroom. You've got a chamber pot for those midnight emergencies, and if you're lucky, you might get a bath once a week. Cleanliness was next to godliness, but in ancient Egypt it was more of a logistical challenge than a daily ritual. The ancient Egyptians valued personal hygiene, but the methods were rudimentary at best. You'd use a mix of natron, a natural mineral salt, and oil to scrub yourself clean, which sounds more like a recipe for a salad dressing than a bath. By midday, you're halfway through your to-do list, and the sun is doing its best impression of an oven set to broil. There's no escaping the heat, and the idea of a siesta is laughable. Instead, you soldier on, perhaps tending to the pharaoh's wardrobe or assisting with preparations for a grand feast. The pharaoh's appearance was crucial, not just for vanity, but for maintaining Ma'at, the cosmic order. Every detail, from the intricacy of the garments to the precise application of kohl eyeliner, mattered. You might think you're just ironing a tunic, but in reality you're upholding the balance of the universe. No pressure. Ever wonder why the pharaohs wore those iconic headdresses and false beards? It was all part of the divine image they needed to project. The Nemes headdress, made of stiffened cloth, symbolized the pharaoh's power over the land and its people. As for the false beard, it was a sign of divinity, worn by male and female pharaohs alike. So next time you try on a fake beard for Halloween, remember you're channeling some serious ancient vibes. As the afternoon wears on, you might find yourself assisting with religious ceremonies, because in ancient Egypt, religion wasn't just a part of life, it was life. Every action, every event, every meal was steeped in religious significance. The pharaoh was seen as a living god, the intermediary between the people and the divine. As a servant, you'd be expected to help with offerings, ensure the sacred spaces were immaculate, and maybe even participate in rituals. It's a lot to juggle, especially when your main motivation is to avoid a one-way ticket to the afterlife before your time. Finally, as the sun begins to set, you start wrapping up your endless list of chores. Exhausted doesn't even begin to cover it. You're ready to collapse into your modest bed, but first, another round of prayers. After all, you need all the divine favor you can get to face another day in the service of the pharaoh. As you drift off to sleep, you might dream of a simpler life, one where the biggest challenge isn't keeping the pharaoh's sand-free sandals spotless. But for now, you're just grateful you survived another day without getting on the wrong side of a crocodile, literal or metaphorical. You collapse onto your straw mat, every muscle screaming louder than a banshee at a rock concert. But alas, tomorrow's another day, and with it comes another set of Herculean tasks fit for a demigod, or, in your case, a lowly servant. Speaking of Herculean, let's address the elephant, or rather the pyramid, in the room. You might have heard tales of the pyramid builders living it up, but let's set the record straight. Far from sipping ambrosia, these workers were neck-deep in toil that would make a marathon runner blush. First off, hauling stones isn't just a workout, it's a lifestyle. Picture this. A limestone block weighing a whopping 2.5 tons doesn't just glide into place. Nope, it's pulled, pushed, and sometimes cursed into position by teams of workers who've probably never heard of OSHA regulations. Forget CrossFit. This was the original test of strength and stamina. Workers laboured in shifts, part of a carefully organised system that would give modern project managers a run for their money. The Great Pyramid of Giza, a towering 481 feet in its prime, required some 2.3 million blocks. That's a lot of stone, sweat and sore backs. Now, onto the myth of the glamorous pyramid builders. Spoiler alert, they weren't slaves. In fact, they were skilled labourers, compensated with rations of bread and beer. Before you romanticize this as some ancient artisanal diet, let's break it down. Bread, the cornerstone of the Egyptian food pyramid, pun intended, was as much a dental hazard as it was a dietary staple. Meanwhile, beer served as both sustenance and sedative, a way to dull the aches of a day spent wrestling rocks. Hardly the stuff of luxury vacations, right? Despite the back-breaking labour, these builders had a certain status. Their graves, discovered near the pyramids, suggest they were respected enough to earn a place of honour in death. This wasn't a free-for-all burial ground, it was a sign of dignity, granted perhaps for their role in creating something immortal. Still, the romantic notion of pyramid builders living in opulence is about as far-fetched as expecting a spa day at the construction site. While the pharaohs aimed to immortalize themselves in stone, you, dear servant, were busy with the mundane yet monumental task of maintaining the royal tombs. Elaborate doesn't even begin to cover the intricacies of these resting places, which were designed to ensure a smooth ride into the afterlife. From painting vivid scenes on tomb walls to ensuring the pharaoh's treasures were meticulously arranged, there was no room for error. These tombs were like ancient resumes, showcasing the pharaoh's achievements and ensuring they were well equipped for eternity. And who do you think was responsible for all this meticulous planning? Yep, you guessed it. Another task for the overworked servant. The workload was relentless, and your reward was more of the same, bread and beer. Consider this the ancient Egyptian version of a paycheck. While it might not sound like much, it was enough to sustain a workforce that built some of history's most enduring monuments. But don't start thinking this was a golden age of worker satisfaction. The labour conditions were harsh, and the expectations were sky high. The pharaoh was considered a living deity, and serving him was akin to serving the gods themselves. You were a cog in the divine machine, expected to perform without fail. Miss a duty, and you might find yourself facing less than divine consequences. Despite the grueling work, there was a certain pride in being part of something so monumental. The pyramids were a symbol of Ma'at, the ancient Egyptian concept of truth, balance, and cosmic order. By working on these colossal structures, you were contributing to the pharaoh's eternal legacy. It was a life of paradoxes, back-breaking labor mixed with the knowledge that you were part of something grander than yourself. Not exactly the storybook tale of ancient Egyptian life, but one filled with its own kind of nobility. As night falls, you're grateful for the reprieve, even if it's just a few hours of sleep before the sun drags you out of bed again. You lie there, contemplating the cosmic order as your mind drifts, knowing that tomorrow you'll once again be juggling the responsibilities of serving a living God. And though your back might protest and your feet ache, there's a strange kind of satisfaction in having survived another day. After all, in the grand scheme of things, you're not just building pyramids, you're building history. And speaking of surviving another day, let's dive into what that really meant for a pharaoh's servant navigating a world where workplace safety was about as well known as the internet. Picture this. The sun is your relentless supervisor, blaring down on you with all the intensity of 1,000 sunscreens left behind in the modern world. Heatstroke wasn't just a possibility, it was practically a rite of passage. Ancient Egypt didn't come with the luxury of air conditioning or even a cool glass of lemonade. Instead, you had the Nile, your best frenemy, offering both life-giving water and a playground for the local crocodile population. Oh yes, the Nile. The mighty, majestic river that sustained civilization also had a bit of a temper. Taking a dip to cool off? Sure, if you didn't mind playing Russian roulette with the local wildlife. Crocodiles were the original "see you later, alligator," except they meant it. These reptiles didn't care if you were a seasoned worker or fresh meat, you were just another potential snack. Don't even get me started on the hippos, those deceptively cute behemoths more territorial than a homeowner with a new lawn. But let's chat about what happened when all those hazards caught up with you. Ancient Egyptian healthcare was, shall we say, a mixed bag. On one hand, they were pioneers in medical practices, with papyrus texts detailing treatments that would make a medieval doctor blush. On the other hand, if your ailment was more than a splinter, you might have been better off praying for a miracle. They had a god for healing, Sekhmet, but that's like having a fire extinguisher in a volcano. Comforting, but not entirely effective. Now, if you thought the Egyptian diet was a dental disaster, wait until you hear about their dentistry. The ancient Egyptians were among the first to practice dental surgery, but don't expect the spa-like experience. Their idea of a dental checkup involved more brutal extraction than a Hollywood blockbuster. Cavities weren't filled, they were gouged out. And anesthesia? Yeah, right. The only thing that might numb the pain was a hearty swig of that grainy beer, if you could keep it down while someone played rock-paper-scalpel with your molars. And while we're on the subject of ancient medical marvels, let's talk about injuries. With all the heavy lifting and construction work, accidents were as common as sunburns. The difference? There wasn't any SPF to save you from a collapsing scaffold or an errant chisel. In a world without OSHA, safety protocols were more wishful thinking than policy. The worker's version of a hard hat was a prayer, and maybe a lucky amulet if you were feeling particularly superstitious. Despite these hazards, the workers had their own kind of camaraderie, a shared resilience born from the daily grind. Sure, the conditions were brutal, but they were part of a community, a collective effort that built wonders of the world. It's easy to romanticize their toil, but the truth is, it was a life lived on the edge of exhaustion, of danger, of history. And while this might sound like the setup for an ancient reality TV show, it's important to remember the stakes. Life expectancy was short, many didn't see their 30s. In a society where every sunrise could be your last, the workers found ways to persevere, to find joy in small victories and humour in absurdities. There's something profoundly human in that, a testament to the spirit that built pyramids one stone at a time. Now, let's debunk another myth, the idea that these workers were voiceless cogs in the pharaoh's grand machine. Recent discoveries suggest they had a surprising amount of agency. Some workers organized strikes to demand better rations, a kind of ancient unionizing effort that would make any modern labor leader proud. Their grievances were often recorded on ostraca pottery shards used as makeshift notepads, detailing everything from missing meat rations to delayed payments. It's a fascinating glimpse into the lives of those who dared to challenge the status quo, even when the odds were stacked against them. As the day wound down, the workers would gather around shared meals, recounting tales of the day's mishaps and close calls. In a world that seemed indifferent to their struggles, these moments of solidarity were a balm for the soul. They reminded each other that they were more than just hands in a labour force. They were part of a legacy, shaping the future even as they toiled in the present. And so, as you lay down to rest after another grueling day, you might find comfort in the thought that you were part of something larger than yourself. You were building not just monuments, but a story that would echo through the ages. As the stars twinkled over the desert, you knew that tomorrow would bring the same challenges, the same heat, the same dangers. But for now, you could close your eyes and dream of a world where the Nile flowed gently, the sun shone kindly, and the crocodiles, well, maybe they just stayed on their side of the river. Ah, ancient Egypt, a land of grandeur and paradoxes, where life as a pharaoh's servant had all the allure of a soggy papyrus scroll. But while the pharaohs were busy immortalizing themselves in stone, you, the humble servant, were navigating a social scene that made a game of chess look like a walk in the park. Let's dive into the social life of a servant, if you can call it that, and peel back the layers of myth to reveal a reality more gritty than glamorous. First, let's get one thing straight. The pharaoh's servants weren't exactly living it up in gilded quarters. The idea that these folks were indulging in lavish feasts and endless entertainment is about as accurate as expecting to find a Wi-Fi signal in the desert. Your typical dwelling was about as spacious as a modern elevator, minus the soothing elevator music. We're talking about a single-room abode, roughly 10 by 15 feet, shared with fellow servants or family. Privacy was a luxury you couldn't afford, and your chances of personal space were about as high as finding a snowstorm in July. Food-wise, forget about those epic banquets you've seen in Hollywood. The daily diet was more survival rations than culinary delight. Your meals would primarily consist of bread and onions, a pairing that did wonders for both your sustenance and your social life, or lack thereof. Bread was not the fluffy, golden loaf you might picture. No, it was dense enough to serve as a doorstop, and often seasoned with a generous helping of sand. If you were really fortunate, you might score some fish or legumes, but meat was rarer than a solar eclipse. It was typically reserved for the elite or religious offerings, making it a once-in-a-blue-moon treat. And speaking of treats, let's tackle the myth of the grand entertainment options supposedly available to the pharaoh's servants. The truth is, your after-hours activities were more about staying out of trouble than indulging in leisure. Forget about theatres, sports arenas, or even a humble game of soccer. If you wanted entertainment, you had to improvise. Music was a popular pastime, with flutes and harps providing a soundtrack to the evening. But if you were expecting a royal concert, think again. This was more garage band than grand opera. Social gatherings, when they did happen, were modest affairs. Servants might gather over dinner to share tales of the day's challenges, swapping stories and perhaps a bit of advice on how to dodge the overseer's ire. Alcohol was a social lubricant, and while the beer was more gruel than Guinness, it helped take the edge off a life full of labour. These gatherings were a rare chance to unwind and enjoy a sense of community, however fleeting it might be. Now, let's debunk the myth of the pampered palace life. The pharaoh's servants were more akin to human Swiss Army knives, expected to handle whatever tasks came their way. Whether it was cleaning, cooking, or maintaining the pharaoh's wardrobe, your job description was as flexible as it was exhausting. The social hierarchy was strictly enforced, and stepping out of line could have consequences sharper than a pyramid's peak. In a world where the concept of a weekend was as foreign as the idea of a vacation, your social life was limited to the time you could steal between chores. Despite these hardships, there was a certain camaraderie among the servants. Shared experiences and mutual challenges forged bonds that transcended the rigid social structure. It was a life of small victories and shared laughter, a testament to the resilience of those who lived in the shadow of one of history's greatest civilizations. While the pharaohs built monuments to their glory, you and your fellow servants built something equally enduring, a community, however humble, that supported each other through the trials of daily life. And let's be honest, it wasn't all doom and gloom. Life had its moments of joy and humour, often at the expense of the very systems that kept you in check. A well-placed joke about the overseer's lack of hair, or a whispered quip about the pharaoh's latest whimsy could spark laughter that echoed through the corridors. These snippets of levity were the real treasures, the golden moments that made the grind bearable. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the land, you might find yourself reflecting on the day's labours. The reality of life as a pharaoh's servant was far from the romanticized tales of luxury and leisure, but within it lay a story of endurance, of finding light in the darkest corners. Tomorrow would bring the same challenges, but it would also bring the same opportunities for connection and camaraderie. In the grand tapestry of history, every thread matters. So while your life might have been one of toil and hardship, it was also one of contribution and community. As you lay down on your straw mat, you could rest knowing that your story was woven into the fabric of a civilization that continues to capture the imagination of the world. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to make it all worthwhile. And so, as you lay on your straw mat, pondering the weave of your life in ancient Egypt, you may start to wonder about the long-term return on investment for all your hard labour. Spoiler alert, it's not looking good. In the grand scheme of Egyptian society, the ladder of success had about as many rungs as a pyramid has corners. Not many. Upward mobility for a pharaoh's servant was a concept as mythical as a unicorn prancing across the Sahara. The reality was, if you were born into servitude, chances were you'd die in it too. The notion of climbing the social ladder was reserved for the gods, or at least those who claimed divine right, like the pharaohs themselves. As a servant, your prospects were as limited as the breath of fresh air in a tomb. Retirement plans? More like a lifelong subscription to the grind, with the only exit strategy being an early trip to the afterlife. Let's face it, life expectancy for the average Egyptian wasn't exactly something to boast about. If you managed to survive your 20s, you were practically a sage. Most ancient Egyptians didn't live past 40, and that was if they were lucky enough to avoid the pitfalls of disease, malnutrition, and the occasional workplace accident involving a runaway chariot or a particularly vengeful hippo. Your chances of seeing retirement were slimmer than a papyrus scroll. Now, let's talk about legacy. While the pharaohs got to leave behind grand monuments and elaborate tombs filled with treasures and curses, your legacy was more of the personal variety. It was in the stories you shared, the camaraderie you built, and maybe, just maybe, in the small, unmarked grave that would eventually house your earthly remains. Not quite the stuff of legends, but your contribution to the construction of those enduring wonders was no less significant. Ah, the romance of it all, right? It's easy to get swept up in the allure of ancient Egypt with its grandiose pyramids and tales of gods walking among mortals. But let's not forget the gritty reality. Life as a pharaoh's servant was a constant dance with drudgery, a daily grind that makes even the toughest modern jobs look like an all-inclusive vacation. No air conditioning, no weekends, and certainly no healthcare plan. Just you, the Nile, and a work schedule that could make a hamster wheel seem like a lazy Sunday. It's tempting to glamorize the past, to picture yourself in flowing robes, basking in the glow of ancient wisdom. But the truth is, we modern folks are spoiled, rotten by conveniences like running water, indoor plumbing, and jobs that won't send us to an early grave. Next time you're grumbling about your morning commute or the lack of an espresso machine at the office, spare a thought for the ancient Egyptians. Their commute involved dodging crocodiles, and their coffee break was more of a keep working or else kind of deal. In the end, though, it's all about perspective. While the life of a pharaoh's servant was no picnic, it was also a testament to human resilience. These individuals, often nameless in the annals of history, contributed to the creation of some of the most awe-inspiring structures the world has ever known. They laboured under the sun, driven by duty, necessity, and perhaps a whisper of hope that their work would endure long after they were gone. So, next time you're feeling overwhelmed by the demands of modern life, remember that you're standing on the shoulders of giants, or at least very tired, very sweaty workers who built the foundations of civilization one stone at a time. Maybe it's not the romanticized tale we like to tell, but it's a story worth remembering. Because in the end, whether you're building pyramids or just trying to get through the day, it's all about finding meaning in the madness and leaving your mark in whatever way you can. As the stars twinkle over the desert, casting their eternal gaze on the land of the pharaohs, you might find some comfort in the thought that your story, like those of countless others, is woven into the tapestry of history. It's a tale of toil and tenacity, of laughter and loss, of life in all its messy, magnificent glory. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of legacy that truly stands the test of time. If Odysseus were around today, he'd probably be that friend who insists on taking the scenic route home and ends up getting lost for a decade. Let's face it, the guy's got a reputation for turning a simple journey into a saga worthy of a Homeric epic. But before we dive into his mythical misadventures, let's rewind to the real world of 1200 BCE, where the Trojan War was less about heroics and more about a logistical nightmare that only an ancient Greek could love. The Trojan War, if it happened at all, was likely less of a dramatic clash of titans and more of a prolonged squabble over trade routes and economic control. The city of Troy, strategically perched like a bouncer at the entrance to the Dardanelles, was a toll booth on the way to the lucrative markets of the Black Sea. So when we talk about Helen's face launching 1,000 ships, let's be real. Those ships were probably more interested in launching profits than rescuing a damsel in distress. Think of the Trojan War as the ancient equivalent of a corporate merger gone wrong. It's like if your neighborhood Starbucks decided to declare war on the local coffee shop because they both wanted control of the best corner in town. And the Greeks, bless their olive oil-soaked hearts, were the squabbling managers sent to sort it all out. The 10-year war probably involved more waiting around than actual fighting, with soldiers spending most of their time playing dice games and complaining about the food. Now, Odysseus himself wasn't just any soldier. He was the king of Ithaca, which sounds impressive until you realize Ithaca was a rocky island with more goats than people. With a population barely in the triple digits, Odysseus was more akin to a small-town mayor than a mighty monarch. But hey, he was resourceful, and in the ancient world, that counted for a lot. He was the guy who could fix your chariot with duct tape and a little ingenuity. During the war, Odysseus was known for his cunning, which is a nice way of saying he was a bit of a trickster. Remember the Trojan horse? That was his brainchild. It's like the ultimate prank that spiraled out of control. Imagine crafting a giant wooden horse, convincing your enemies it's a gift, and then sneaking your troops inside. Today, we'd call that psychological warfare, or maybe just a really intense game of hide-and-seek. But back then, it was a stroke of genius that, according to legend, led to the fall of Troy. But let's not forget the absurdities of ancient logistics. Unlike the streamlined military operations of today, the Greek army was more like a large, dysfunctional family on a road trip. They had no centralized command, so each city-state sent its own contingent, complete with its own leaders, egos, and grudges. Coordinating this ragtag bunch was like herding cats, only the cats were armed and prone to sulking. And then there was the weather. The Aegean Sea, as picturesque as it is, can be a sailor's nightmare. Storms could pop up without warning, turning a straightforward journey into an endurance test. It's no wonder Odysseus took a decade to get home. He was dealing with Mother Nature's mood swings on top of everything else. And for those ancient mariners, a compass was as mythical as a GPS device. They navigated by the stars, which might sound romantic, until you realize that cloudy nights could leave them literally and figuratively lost at sea. Now, let's debunk some myths. The idea of the Greeks camping out on the shores of Troy for 10 years might conjure images of epic battles and nightly feasts. But let's be honest, it was probably more like an extended camping trip gone wrong. Supplies were limited, hygiene was questionable, and morale was as unpredictable as the weather. Sure, the poets talk about warriors' bravery, but they conveniently skip over the boredom, the bickering, and the bad weather that filled the days between skirmishes. And what about the women who supposedly watched and waited back home? Penelope, Odysseus's wife, is often portrayed as the epitome of patience and loyalty, weaving by day and unraveling her work by night to fend off suitors. But let's entertain the possibility that she might have had a bit more on her plate. Running a household, managing lands, and protecting her son Telemachus from opportunistic nobles probably kept her busier than any loom ever could. So there you have it, the Trojan War stripped of its poetic glamour and laid bare as a messy, protracted affair driven by economics, egos, and the occasional divine intervention. Odysseus, the man behind the myth, was less a conquering hero and more a savvy survivor, navigating the chaos of war with a blend of wit and tenacity. As we continue on this journey through his life, keep in mind that the real story is often as surprising and compelling as the legend itself. minus the divine lightning bolts and magical sea monsters, of course. As the dust from Troy's smouldering ruins settled, Odysseus and his ragtag crew finally set sail, eager to leave the scene of their prolonged misadventure. But hold your horses, ships, because the journey home was about to become a Greek tragedy of its own. Welcome to the world of ancient seafaring, where the real monsters were less about one-eyed giants and more about the logistics of maritime maintenance. Let's talk ships, shall we? Maintaining a fleet of wooden vessels was no small feat. These weren't your sleek, streamlined yachts. They were more like floating versions of rickety old jalopies. Each one required a small forest's worth of timber, not to mention the manpower to build and repair. The ancient Greeks used pine and cedar, but let's face it, after 10 years of war, supplies were scarcer than a sober Spartan at a wine festival. By the time Odysseus was ready to depart, his ships were probably held together by little more than prayers and good intentions. Then there was the matter of supplies. You'd think that after a decade-long siege, the Greeks would have become experts in resource management. But alas, their logistical skills were about as sharp as a marble. Provisions like olive oil, wine, grains, and salted meat were as critical as they were costly. Feeding a crew of hungry sailors was no easy task, and it certainly wasn't cheap. A single amphora of olive oil could cost a day's wages, and wine was just as dear. Forget about gourmet meals, these guys were lucky if they didn't run out of rations halfway across the Aegean. In fact, Odysseus's so-called adventures were often more about scrounging for food and fresh water than facing mythical beasts. Take, for instance, his legendary encounter with the Cyclops. In reality, this might have been less about blinding a giant and more about avoiding the local fishermen who didn't take kindly to strangers raiding their fish stocks. Imagine Odysseus and his men sneaking around an island trying to nab some catch of the day without getting caught. It puts a whole new spin on the tale, doesn't it? And let's not forget the economic backdrop driving these escapades. The ancient Mediterranean was a bustling hub of trade, with routes crisscrossing like a spider's web. Every island and coastal town had its own agenda, and a ship full of Greek warriors was as welcome as a tax collector at a tax evasion convention. Odysseus and his crew had to navigate not only the treacherous seas but also the equally volatile world of politics and trade. They were like ancient door-to-door salesmen, perpetually trying to barter and negotiate just to survive. Of course, the gods always had a hand in the mix, or so the stories go. But maybe, just maybe, the storms and setbacks were less about divine meddling and more about the unpredictability of the sea. Ancient sailors relied on the stars to guide them, which was all well and good until those stars were obscured by clouds or the occasional thunderstorm. Navigating the Aegean was like trying to find your way through a maze with a blindfold on. No wonder Odysseus ended up taking the scenic route. As for the crew, they were a motley bunch, pulled from various city-states and as diverse in temperament as a basket of unruly kittens. They were soldiers, not sailors, and their nautical expertise was likely limited to not falling overboard. It's safe to say that Odysseus's leadership was tested more by his own men than by any mythical monsters. How do you keep morale high when the only thing on the horizon is more horizon? And speaking of horizons, let's pause to consider the broader economic picture. Greece in the late Bronze Age was a collection of city-states, each with its own interests and rivalries. Trade was the lifeblood of these communities, and control of sea routes was as fiercely contested as any battlefield. Odysseus's journey wasn't just a quest to return to Ithaca, it was a microcosm of the wider struggle for economic power and influence in the ancient world. His voyage was as much about securing alliances and trade agreements as it was about getting home to Penelope. But don't be too quick to dismiss the romance of it all. The stories of Odysseus's adventures have endured precisely because they capture the imagination. Who wouldn't be captivated by tales of sirens, giants, and vengeful gods? Yet beneath the surface of these myths lies the gritty reality of survival, navigation, and sheer human determination. Odysseus was less the conquering hero of legend and more a cunning survivor, a man who could think on his feet and adapt to whatever the fates or the weather threw his way. As we navigate the twists and turns of his journey, keep in mind that the true Odyssey was more about the journey than the destination. It was a test of endurance, wit, and tenacity, set against a backdrop of economic pressures and the ever-unpredictable sea. And while the myths may embellish the details, the core of the story is as real today as it was then. the struggle to find one's way in a world that's as vast and complex as the ocean itself. So stay tuned, because the adventure is just beginning, and there are still plenty of storms to weather and myths to unravel. Now, let's dive into the real meat and potatoes, or rather, olives and fish, of Odysseus's infamous stopovers. We're talking about the times when his journey home turned into something resembling an ancient Greek version of a road trip gone awry. These weren't detours for the sake of sightseeing. They were pit stops born out of necessity, driven by the harsh realities of ancient maritime travel and the unpredictable social landscape of the Mediterranean. First up, let's tackle the so-called magical island of Aia, home to the enchanting sorceress Circe. According to Homer, this was where Odysseus's men were turned into swine, a classic case of misbehaving crew members getting their just desserts, or so the legend goes. But before you start imagining a pigsty of mythical proportions, consider this: Circe's island might have been less magic and more marketplace. Ancient sailors like Odysseus had to trade whatever they could spare to restock their dwindling supplies. Perhaps our hero wasn't dealing with a witch, but rather a shrewd negotiator who knew how to drive a hard bargain. Circe's so-called spells might really have been the allure of much-needed provisions and rest. After weeks at sea, with little more than salted fish and stale bread, the promise of fresh food was probably enough to make anyone feel bewitched. And let's be honest, after a decade of battle and bad weather, a good meal and a soft bed would seem downright magical. Moving on, we have the infamous encounter with the sirens. These aren't your average nightclub singers with a penchant for luring sailors to their doom. In reality, the sirens could well have been the ancient world's equivalent of strategic marketing. Picture coastal towns advertising themselves with tales of irresistible beauty and bounty, drawing in weary mariners with promises of trade and respite. Odysseus, ever the savvy traveller, knew better than to fall for the siren song of empty promises. His solution? Stuffing his crew's ears with beeswax and tying himself to the mast, a practical, if melodramatic, approach to avoiding a tourist trap. Let's not forget the economic forces at play here. Each stop wasn't just a chance for rest and relaxation, it was a vital opportunity to engage in trade and diplomacy. The Mediterranean was a vibrant tapestry of city-states, each with its own rules and rivalries. Navigating these waters meant more than just steering clear of rocks. It required an acute awareness of the shifting political tides. Odysseus, with a king's title and a trader's cunning, was constantly negotiating for safe passage and favourable terms. And then there's the legend of Scylla and Charybdis, two sea monsters that supposedly threatened to swallow sailors whole. In reality, these were likely metaphors for the very real dangers of navigating the Straits of Messina, a narrow passage between the island of Sicily and the Italian mainland. The waters here are notoriously treacherous, with whirlpools and rocky outcrops that can easily wreck an unsuspecting ship. Forget mythical beasts, the real monsters were the capricious currents and craggy cliffs that threatened to claim Odysseus's crew. The tale of the cattle of the sun god is another classic legend that deserves a closer look. According to myth, Odysseus's men, driven by hunger, slaughtered the sacred cattle of Helios, incurring the wrath of the gods. But let's put aside the divine drama for a moment. It's more plausible that Odysseus and his men, desperate for sustenance, made the risky decision to raid a local herd. In a world where livestock was a prized commodity, such an act would have been a serious transgression, carrying real-world consequences in the form of retaliation from local authorities, or worse, neighbouring city-states. The political landscape of the Mediterranean was like a high-stakes game of chess, with every move scrutinized and every action carrying potential repercussions. Odysseus had to navigate not only the physical dangers of the sea, but also the complex web of alliances and enmities among the coastal communities. Each stopover was a calculated risk, a chance to secure the resources needed to press on with the journey home. It's easy to see how these events were transformed into tales of divine intervention and mythical creatures. After all, who wouldn't prefer a story of gods and monsters to the gritty reality of supply shortages and political maneuvering? The myths offer a romantic escape, a chance to believe in a world where heroes battled supernatural forces rather than the harsh elements and human frailties. But beneath the surface of these stories lies the enduring truth of Odysseus's Odyssey, a struggle for survival in an unforgiving world, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. His journey was shaped by the economic and social dynamics of the time, a reflection of the broader struggles for power and resources that defined the ancient Mediterranean. So as we continue to unravel the legendary adventures of Odysseus, remember that the real journey was as much about the challenges of the human condition as it was about the whims of the gods. It was a saga of survival, strategy, and the relentless pursuit of home, a tale as timeless and compelling as the sea itself. But don't get too comfortable, the story is far from over, and there are still plenty of waves to ride and myths to unmask. Stay tuned for the next leg of this epic voyage, where we'll delve even deeper into the trials and triumphs of our intrepid hero. Now, as Odysseus was busy outwitting one mythical monster after another, life back in Ithaca wasn't exactly a Mediterranean paradise. Picture it. Odysseus is MIA for roughly 2 decades, and his rocky little kingdom with its modest population of a few hundred is in upheaval. With the king presumed dead and his son Telemachus still a teenager, Ithaca became a soap opera of power grabs and domestic drama that would make any reality TV producer swoon. First up, let's set the scene with some hard numbers. Ithaca wasn't Athens or Sparta with their thousands of citizens and armies. This was a place where everyone knew everyone else's goat by name. So when Odysseus didn't show up for dinner for, 10 years, the political vacuum was as noticeable as a toga at a toga party. Enter the suitors, those pesky nobles who descended upon the palace like a pack of ravenous wolves. But let's cut through the romance. These guys weren't here for love. They were here for land, power, and a shot at the title of king. In the power dynamics of ancient Greece, marrying the queen wasn't just a romantic gesture, it was a political maneuver. Penelope, the supposed paragon of wifely devotion, was left juggling a precarious balance of power. Her faithfulness, often lauded as love's ultimate test, was just as much about maintaining control over Ithaca's resources. Her weaving by day and unraveling by night was less about longing and more about buying time in a strategic chess game where each move mattered. Let's talk economics. With Odysseus gone, Ithaca's economy must have felt the strain. Picture the suitors like a horde of frat boys with bottomless stomachs and no intention of footing the bill. They gorged on the palace's resources, turning what might have been a modest surplus into a financial sinkhole. Maintaining a household, especially one with a bunch of freeloaders, wasn't cheap. Livestock, grains, and wine would have been consumed at alarming rates, and with Ithaca's limited production capabilities, this was a recipe for economic disaster. Now, Penelope wasn't just playing the waiting game, she was playing the suitors against each other. She promised to choose a suitor when she finished weaving a shroud for her father-in-law Laertes, knowing full well she could stall indefinitely. This wasn't a soap opera move, it was a shrewd political strategy to maintain her son's inheritance until he was old enough to take over. Telemachus, meanwhile, was growing up in the shadow of his legendary father, trying to assert himself amidst a bunch of older, power-hungry men. And how about those suitors? They weren't just sitting around sipping diluted wine and wooing Penelope with bad poetry. In the absence of Odysseus, they saw an opportunity to control Ithaca's strategic position and resources. Ithaca might have been small, but it was a crucial outpost in the trade networks crisscrossing the Ionian and Aegean seas. Securing Ithaca would mean control over critical trade routes, and in ancient Greece that was as good as gold. But don't let the myth fool you into thinking these were just local boys hoping for a date with Penelope. Many came from other islands, looking to expand their influence and possibly annex Ithaca into their own growing territories. It's a classic tale of political ambition dressed up in the guise of romance. The suitors were essentially ancient venture capitalists, bringing gifts and promises of alliances to sweeten the deal. Meanwhile, Penelope's patience wasn't just about fidelity, it was a masterclass in diplomacy. She kept the suitors in check through clever manipulation, ensuring that no single suitor gained enough power to threaten her or her son. Her actions were less about a yearning heart and more about a steel trap mind, navigating a political minefield with the finesse of a seasoned stateswoman. And then there's the rest of Ithaca's population. With their king gone, they were left to fend for themselves. Odysseus's absence meant a lack of centralized leadership, and in a society where a king's responsibility extended to protection and economic stability, this could spell trouble. The islanders would have had to rely on local leaders and their own devices to maintain some semblance of order. The social fabric of Ithaca was undoubtedly strained. The longer Odysseus was gone, the more the people would have questioned his return and the legitimacy of his family's continued rule. Telemachus, as his father's heir, was under constant pressure to prove himself, and his coming-of-age tale is as much about securing his legacy as it is about finding his father. As the suitors continued their siege of the palace, the political landscape of Ithaca was a ticking time bomb. With each passing year, the stakes grew higher, and the potential for conflict loomed larger. Penelope's strategy of delay couldn't last forever, and the suitors' patience was wearing thin. And so, as Odysseus battled monsters and navigated the whims of the gods, the real drama played out on the shores of Ithaca. An epic tale of power, survival, and strategic maneuvering. The myth may focus on Odysseus's trials, but the true Odyssey was unfolding back home, where human cunning and resilience were tested every day. So stay tuned, because the story is far from over. The tension in Ithaca is building to a crescendo, and the stage is set for a dramatic showdown. As we continue this exploration of history's most famous homecoming, remember that the real adventure is just as much about the people waiting as it is about the hero on his way home. Keep your eyes peeled for the twists and turns yet to come, because the saga of Odysseus in Ithaca is a tale of intrigue and strategy worthy of any epic. And there it is, the final act of our Greek soap opera, Odysseus's grand return, the moment where the man of many tales finally sets foot back in Ithaca. This is where the legend really cranks up the drama, but don't be fooled by the Hollywood gloss. The reality was less a triumphant homecoming and more like trying to clean up after a decade-long frat party with political fallout to match. Picture Odysseus, arriving not with a parade of triumph but more like a beleaguered traveller shaking the dust of 20 years off his sandals. He wasn't exactly welcomed with open arms. After all, he's been gone long enough for the locals to start questioning if the guy was ever coming back. But the legend insists on a big reveal, so we get Odysseus in disguise, testing the waters before making his move. It's the ancient Greek equivalent of a CEO returning to the company incognito, assessing the damage before taking control. Now, let's talk numbers. Odysseus didn't exactly return to a bustling metropolis. Ithaca's population was still hovering around a few hundred, maybe just enough to fill out a small town hall meeting today. And the throne room wasn't packed with adoring citizens. It was overrun with those pesky suitors who'd been freeloading and feasting at his expense. Imagine Odysseus surveying the scene, calculating the cost of all that wasted livestock. Each sheep and goat devoured was a tangible dent in Ithaca's already strained economy. Reclaiming his throne wasn't just about asserting authority, it was about a complete political reboot. First, Odysseus had to deal with the suitors. Legend has it, he picked them off in a feat of archery that would make Robin Hood look like an amateur. In reality, it was probably more of a strategic purge than a heroic showdown. It's one thing to be a legendary hero, another to be a leader who can stabilize a fracturing society. This wasn't just about vengeance, it was a calculated move to eliminate threats and restore order. With the suitors out of the picture, Odysseus faced the next challenge, winning over the island's inhabitants. After all, you can't rule a kingdom without the people's support. He had to prove that he was still the leader they needed, not just a ghost from the past. This probably involved a fair bit of politicking, reassuring the locals that their rocky isle was safe under his governance. It's like a politician on a campaign trail, shaking hands and kissing babies. Odysseus needed to rebuild trust and re-establish his authority, one olive branch at a time. Penelope, meanwhile, was no passive bystander in this saga. Her role in maintaining Ithaca's stability during Odysseus's absence was crucial. She wasn't just a backdrop for Odysseus's triumph, she was an active participant in the kingdom's political restructuring. Together, they had to navigate the post-crisis landscape, mending alliances and securing Ithaca's place in the wider Greek world. Think of them as the ultimate power couple, balancing personal reunion with public duty. But let's not get too swept up in the romance of it all. The myth of Odysseus's return is as much about consolidation of power as it is about love and loyalty. His journey back to the throne was a pragmatic affair, filled with as many negotiations and compromises as sword fights and declarations of love. And as for the gods, who supposedly guided his hand in fate, they might have been more like metaphors for the unpredictable nature of political fortune. Odysseus had survived the whims of the sea. Now he had to navigate the equally treacherous waters of human politics. Let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture. Odysseus' saga didn't just end with his return, it was the beginning of a new chapter in Ithaca's history. His re-establishment of power signified a shift in the island's political landscape, a return to a semblance of normalcy after years of chaos. But the story of his journey and homecoming didn't stay confined to Ithaca's borders. It travelled through the Greek world, morphing into the epic tale we know today. The mythologizing of Odysseus' story had profound implications for Greek culture. It became a blueprint for resilience, a testament to human endurance against insurmountable odds. The Greeks, facing their own challenges in a world of shifting alliances and constant warfare, found in Odysseus an embodiment of cunning and perseverance. His story was retold, exaggerated, and immortalized in the works of poets and playwrights, each iteration adding layers to the legend. Why does Odysseus' tale still captivate us? Perhaps because it resonates with the universal struggle against adversity. At its core, the Odyssey is about finding one's way home, both literally and metaphorically. It's about the trials we face and the resilience we muster, the balance between fate and free will. In Odysseus, we see a bit of ourselves, a flawed hero navigating a complex world, striving for stability in the face of chaos. So, as we wrap up this epic journey through the historical and mythical realms of Odysseus, let's take a moment to appreciate the layers of truth and fiction that make his story timeless. It's a saga that reflects the human condition, with all its messiness and magnificence. And while the myths may embellish the details, the essence of Odysseus' Odyssey remains as compelling today as it was in ancient Greece, a tale of adventure, resilience, and the enduring quest for home. The sound of clinking sheep bells drifts through your window, mingling with the first rays of the Sumerian sun. Congratulations, you're a priest in Uruk, 3rd millennium BC, and the day begins with a ritual as ancient as the bricks in the city's walls. You rise with a practiced sigh, knowing that while others shuffle sheep and stack bricks, you'll be donning robes of wool finer than a commoner's wildest dreams. This wool? It's not just any wool. It's imported from distant lands, traded along routes that weave through the Mesopotamian tapestry of commerce like the intricate patterns on your garment. First stop, the purification ritual. Before you can even think about breakfast, you've got to wash away the metaphorical dirt of yesterday's dealings. You step into the temple's baths, where the water is cleaner than the Euphrates after a flood. No small feat in this bustling metropolis. The ritual's not just about hygiene, it's a sacred awakening, a splash of the divine, to prep you for a day of balancing the scales between heaven and the earthly chaos of Uruk. Dressed and ready, you step into the temple courtyard, a hub of clamour and commerce. You might as well be the CFO of Sumerian Inc., because this temple is more than a place of worship. It's the beating heart of Uruk's economy, a sprawling enterprise that controls vast tracts of land and an army of labourers. Grain, livestock, and the occasional silver shekel flow in from the countryside like tributaries feeding a mighty river. It's your job to make sure these offerings are properly accounted for and redistributed. Forget about divine intervention. It's your acumen that keeps this divine machine well-oiled. The temple's granaries are bursting with barley, the city's staple crop. Each sack holds enough to feed a family for a week, and you oversee thousands of them. These are the real treasures of Uruk, more valuable than gold in a land where bread is life. But let's not forget the silver shekels, those shiny discs that gleam like the eyes of the gods. A few of these will buy you a slave or two, or maybe that extra plot of land you've been eyeing. It's a heavy responsibility, but it comes with perks that would make a modern CEO drool. You're no mere spiritual guide. You're a power broker, balancing spirituality with the gritty reality of maintaining influence. The temple's economic muscle gives you a say in the city's politics. The governor might rule Uruk, but you're the one with a direct line to the divine. When you speak, people listen, not just because you claim to interpret the will of the gods, but because you can also make or break fortunes with a nod or a frown. The political landscape is as fertile as the fields you oversee. Every decision is a calculated move in the game of influence, where alliances are as crucial as the temples themselves. You're not just a religious figure. You're a player in Uruk's high-stakes game of thrones, where the prize is power and the cost is eternal vigilance. As the morning rolls on, you're reminded that, while the robes might be finer and the duties grander, you're still tethered to the same basic needs as any of Uruk's residents. You're a priest, yes, but you're also a man with an eye on survival in a world where the gods are capricious and human nature's no less fickle. As you move through your duties, you're acutely aware of the delicate dance you perform daily, each step a calculated measure to keep both divine favor and earthly power securely on your side. So, you've got your divine and earthly ducks in a row, and it's time to head to the towering marvel that is the ziggurat. This isn't just any structure, it's the great ziggurat of Uruk, a testament to human ambition and ingenuity that would make even the most hardened skeptic pause for a moment of awe, or at least a sigh of exasperation at the thought of climbing all those stairs. Picture this, a massive step pyramid looming over the city like a stairway to heaven, except heaven is more of a metaphorical concept and less of an actual destination. The gods, as it turns out, prefer to keep their distance. But before we get into the spiritual significance or lack thereof, let's talk about the physical reality of this architectural feat. Constructed from mud bricks, this ziggurat required the labor of hundreds, maybe thousands, of workers. Imagine the scene. A veritable army of laborers laying bricks under the scorching sun, each one hoping that today's back-breaking work might earn them a little extra barley to take home. And don't even get me started on the supervisors. Those guys had a job that makes modern project managers look like they're on vacation. Now, let's not forget that these bricks didn't just appear out of thin air. Each one was painstakingly molded and dried, a process that could take weeks. With no modern machinery, this construction was all about manpower, sweat, and perhaps a little bit of divine intervention. Or at least that's what you'd tell the workers to keep morale up. Hundreds of thousands of bricks stacked one atop the other in a feat of engineering that defies easy explanation. The ziggurat stands as a reminder that, yes, humans have always been stubborn enough to make the impossible possible. Climbing the ziggurat stairs, you're not just ascending a structure, you're embarking on a spiritual journey of sorts. And by spiritual journey, I mean a rigorous workout that puts modern gym routines to shame. Each step is a reminder of the divine hierarchy you're part of, with you somewhere in the middle, juggling responsibilities like a circus performer. By the time you reach the top, you're both physically exhausted and spiritually invigorated, ready to face the day's challenges armed with nothing but resolve and a bit of altitude-induced clarity. Once at the top, you oversee the temple's administrative duties. Think of it as the ancient world's version of an office, just with more incense and fewer ergonomic chairs. As a priest, your role is far from just chanting hymns and making sacrifices. You're essentially the CFO of this divine corporation. Offerings flow in and must be meticulously documented. Enter the temple scribes, the unsung heroes of Sumerian bureaucracy. Armed with styluses and clay tablets, they record every transaction, a process as laborious as it sounds. Imagine writing an entire spreadsheet by hand, in cuneiform no less, with each symbol painstakingly pressed into clay. It's a job that would make even the most diligent Excel enthusiast break into a cold sweat. If you think modern bureaucracy is a nightmare, try managing a temple's accounts in ancient Uruk. Every grain of barley, every head of cattle, every silver shekel must be accounted for, and woe betide the scribe who misplaces a tablet. These clay records are the lifeblood of the temple's economy, and your oversight ensures that everything runs smoothly, or at least as smoothly as possible, in a world where gods and mortals alike are prone to whims. The scribes, with their clay tablets and styluses, are the gatekeepers of this ancient data, ensuring that your temple doesn't just survive, but thrives in the cutthroat world of Mesopotamian economics. And while there's a certain romance in imagining yourself as the high priest of a mighty temple, the reality is that much of your day is spent navigating an endless sea of records and administration. It's a balancing act that requires the patience of a saint and the strategic mind of a chess grandmaster. You're not just dealing with divine matters, you're neck-deep in the very human world of logistics and resource management. It's a task that would make even the most seasoned modern office worker break out in hives. As you look over the city from atop the ziggurat, you're reminded that this temple, this city, and even your role within it, are part of a grand tapestry woven by countless hands over countless years. The bricks beneath your feet, the scribes at their clay tablets, and the workers toiling in the sun are all threads in this intricate pattern. Each day is a delicate dance of power, faith, and economics, and you're the one pulling the strings, or at least trying to, without tangling the whole thing into a knot. In this world, where gods and humans coexist in a delicate balance, your role is both a privilege and a burden. You're a mediator between the divine and the mundane, a figure of authority and responsibility. It's a role that demands everything you have and more, but it's also one that offers rewards that are as intangible as they are profound. As the sun sets over Uruk, casting long shadows over the ziggurat, you prepare to descend those stairs, leaving the day's worries behind, but always ready to pick them up again tomorrow. As you begin your descent from the ziggurat, leaving behind the day's administrative chaos, you're greeted by the heady aroma of incense wafting through the temple grounds. It's a smell as intoxicating as it is sacred, a blend of resin and mystery that signifies it's time to switch gears from economic strategist to spiritual maestro. Midday has arrived, and with it, the call to perform the religious ceremonies that keep Uruk's cosmic balance in check. No pressure, right? These rituals are not just for show, they're the lifeline of Uruk's divine connection, a complex choreography of chants, offerings, and smoke that aims to keep the gods appeased and the city prosperous. You might think of these rituals as ancient performance art, where you're both the director and lead actor, with an audience that includes everyone from the city's elite to the gods themselves. Talk about stage fright. First up, the chants. Forget karaoke night. These are intricate hymns sung in Sumerian, a language as old as the dirt under your sandals. Each syllable is a carefully crafted appeal to the gods, a verbal tapestry of devotion designed to secure their favor. As you lead the congregation, your voice rises and falls in a rhythm that echoes off the temple walls, each note a testament to the divine connection you're trying to forge. Lose your place in the hymn, and it's not just your pride on the line, it's the city's entire crop yield. Then there's the incense, the olfactory equivalent of a red carpet. Made from frankincense and myrrh, it's a luxury that could finance a few sheep or a modest plot of land. But in this sacred space, it's worth its weight in barley. The smoke spirals into the air, carrying prayers towards the heavens, or at least that's the idea. In reality, it's more likely to tickle the noses of those gathered, including the occasional sneeze from a novice priest unaccustomed to its pungency. Now, if you're wondering why all this pomp and circumstance matters, it's because the Sumerians believed their city's fortunes were directly linked to divine favor. No pressure there, just the fate of Uruk resting on your shoulders. The gods were thought to be as capricious as they were powerful, and keeping them soothed was as much a matter of civic duty as it was spiritual devotion. You're here to ensure the barley fields don't dry up, the Euphrates doesn't flood its banks, and the rival city of Kish doesn't decide today's a good day for a skirmish. But don't let the mysticism fool you. Beneath the layers of incense and hymns lies a very realpolitik strategy. These ceremonies are as much about maintaining public order as they are about divine favor. The spectacle reassures the citizens of Uruk that their leaders have everything under control, that the gods are on their side, and that prosperity is just around the corner, assuming, of course, that the omens are favorable. Ah, the omens. Here's where you, the priest, become part meteorologist, part economist, and a dash of political strategist. Interpreting omens is as much an art as it is a science, a skill that requires both intuition and a good dose of theatrics. A flock of birds flying east could mean a bumper crop this year, a solar eclipse, perhaps a sign to batten down the hatches and avoid any major undertakings. Your interpretations guide everything from planting seasons to military campaigns, a responsibility that makes modern-day fortune-telling look like child's play. People rely on your predictions to plan their lives, and while they might not always understand the intricacies, they trust your divine connection. After all, it's not like they can just Google the weather forecast or check the stock market. Your word is law, and your counsel is sought by everyone from the local farmer to the city's governor, each hoping for a tidbit of celestial insight. It's a heady mix of power and pressure, one that demands you walk the tightrope between divine mystery and human skepticism. Of course, while the public might see you as a mystical figure, you're fully aware of the pragmatic side of your role. The rituals and omens serve a dual purpose. Sure, they're about keeping the gods happy, but they're also about keeping the populace in line. A well-timed omen can quell unrest, inspire confidence, or even rally the city for war. It's less about divine will, and more about strategic maneuvering, using the heavens as a backdrop for your very earthly agenda. You've got to hand it to the ancient Sumerians. They knew how to play the long game. The priesthood isn't just about spiritual guidance. It's a cornerstone of political power, a role that demands as much cunning as faith. And while the incense might cloud your senses, it's clear that your place in the society is secured not just by divine favor, but by your ability to navigate the shifting sands of Uruk's social and political landscape. As you wrap up the ceremonies, the echoes of chants still ringing in your ears, you take a moment to reflect on the day's events. You're not just a priest, you're a linchpin in the intricate machinery of Uruk, a city that thrives on the delicate balance between the divine and the mundane. And while the rituals might seem like a relic of the past, they're as vital to the city's survival as the barley fields and the Euphrates itself. The sun continues its relentless journey across the sky, and you know that while the morning's rituals have drawn to a close, the day's responsibilities are far from over. As the scent of incense lingers like a fading memory, you prepare to descend back into the very human world of commerce and politics, where the stakes are as high as the ziggurat's peak. Your journey today is a testament to the enduring power of faith and the unyielding force of human ambition, a dance between the sacred and the secular that has defined Uruk for millennia and will continue to shape its destiny long after you're gone. As the sun begins its lazy descent, casting long shadows that stretch like fingers over Uruk's bustling streets, you turn your attention to the temple's visitors. The morning might have been all about divine devotion and appeasing the gods, but now it's time to switch hats and dive into the world of diplomacy and trade. Think of it as ancient Uruk's version of cocktail hour, minus the cocktails, but with plenty of wheeling and dealing. First up, the petitioners. These folks come in all shapes and sizes, from farmers hoping for divine blessings on their crops, to merchants seeking a little celestial nudge to boost their business. Picture it, a line of hopeful souls snaking out of the temple, each clutching offerings that range from a modest jug of goat's milk to elaborately woven textiles. They're here for a piece of the divine pie, and you're the one doling out the slices. Of course, it's not just about granting boons. Every interaction is a careful dance, a blend of spiritual guidance and practical advice. You're like a combination of a life coach and a fortune teller, with a dash of financial advisor thrown in for good measure. Someone's asking for a blessing on their flock? You might suggest a new pasture to avoid disease, seeking prosperity in trade. Perhaps a whispered prayer and a reminder to invest in that promising copper from Oman. Ah yes, copper from Oman. Now there's a topic that could heat up any ancient boardroom. This reddish-brown metal is a cornerstone of Uruk's economy, as vital to your city as silicon chips are to the tech industry today. The trade routes that bring it to your doorstep are legendary, stretching hundreds of miles across harsh deserts and treacherous mountain passes. It's a logistical nightmare that would give even the most seasoned modern supply chain manager a migraine. But the payoff? Pure gold, or rather, copper. But it's not just copper making its way to Uruk's bustling markets. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan adds a splash of exotic color to the mix. This deep blue stone is prized for its beauty and used as much in jewelry as in adorning the temples where you spend your days. Picture it. A stone that's travelled over 1,000 miles, crossing empires and cultures, just to end up as an embellishment on a statue of a god who never leaves his pedestal. Romantic, right? And yet, what a feat of human determination and economic savvy. The temple isn't merely a place of worship, it's a hub of international relations, a diplomatic fortress where trade deals are hammered out with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Foreign dignitaries arrive with their entourages, each one eager to strike a deal that benefits their homeland while filling Uruk's coffers. It's your job to navigate these waters, balancing the needs of your city with the demands of far-off lands. Now, ancient trade negotiations might not have involved PowerPoint presentations or conference calls, but they weren't without their own drama. Imagine trying to convey the importance of a fair trade deal through a translator who's more interested in his lunch than your copper ore, or the dignitary who insists on divine intervention to seal a deal, as if the gods are just waiting in the wings to sign on the dotted line. And let's not forget the occasional need for divine arbitration. Sometimes, when talks hit an impasse, both parties look to you for a sign from the gods. It's your moment to shine, or sweat like a modern-day mediator. You might consult the omens, roll the dice of fate, or simply offer your own judgment with a hint of divine authority. After all, who's going to argue with a priest who claims to speak for the gods? The temple's influence in international relations is as vast as the trade networks that crisscross the ancient world. Your diplomatic acumen is legendary, or at least it better be if you want to keep Uruk at the center of Mesopotamian commerce. Each successful negotiation strengthens your city's standing, making it a beacon of prosperity in a world where alliances are as fickle as the winds. And while the romantic idea of the temple as a diplomatic hub is appealing, let's not sugarcoat it. Diplomacy in ancient Uruk is as much about shrewd deal-making as it is about divine guidance. It's a game of strategy, where every move is calculated and every outcome uncertain. The stakes are high and the players are ruthless. But that's what makes it all so exhilarating, isn't it? As the afternoon wears on, you find yourself reflecting on the temple's role in this grand tapestry of trade and diplomacy. It's a complex web, woven with threads of faith, commerce, and human ambition. Each visitor, each dignitary, adds their own strand to this intricate design, a testament to the enduring power of human connection. And you, standing at the center of it all, are the one pulling the strings, ensuring that Uruk remains a shining star in the ancient world's constellation. But as evening approaches, you know that the day isn't quite over. The sun may be setting, but your responsibilities continue. There are always more visitors to see, more deals to broker, more blessings to bestow. The life of a Sumerian priest is nothing if not relentless, a constant juggling act between the divine and the mundane. So, as you prepare to welcome the next wave of petitioners and dignitaries, you can't help but marvel at the sheer audacity of it all. The temple, the trade, the diplomacy. Each is a reflection of the human spirit's unyielding quest for connection and prosperity. It's a dance as old as civilization itself, a dance that you, with all your wisdom and wit, are uniquely poised to lead. And as the shadows lengthen and the stars begin to twinkle above, you know that tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new stories to tell. After all, in the ever-turning wheel of Uruk's fortunes, the only constant is change. As the stars begin their nightly twinkle over Uruk, you finally shed the weight of the day's duties, ready to indulge in an evening that promises a touch of indulgence. After all, even a Sumerian priest needs to refuel, and here's a little secret, it's not all fasting and whispered prayers. Tonight, you're swapping divine hymns for something a bit more tangible, like a modest feast that's as much about community as it is about sustenance. Picture yourself reclining on a well-worn mat surrounded by your fellow priests and a handful of local bigwigs. No grand banquets here, but the food? Oh, it's a culinary tapestry that tells the story of Uruk itself. Barley bread, of course, because, let's face it, this stuff is the backbone of Mesopotamian sustenance. It's the ancient equivalent of a peanut butter sandwich. Simple, dependable, and surprisingly satisfying. Then there's the lamb stew, simmering with a mix of spices that would make any modern-day foodie swoon. It's a heady concoction of cumin, coriander, and garlic, with a touch of date syrup for that sweet savory punch. This dish isn't just a meal. It's a testament to the trade routes that crisscross the ancient world, bringing exotic flavors to your humble table. Imagine spices from the Indus Valley, thousands of miles away, finding their way into your pot. It's like the ancient version of farm-to-table dining, only with a bit more travel involved. As you dig into this feast, it's more than just a meal, it's a social glue that binds you to your peers. The sharing of food is a sacred act in itself, a way to solidify alliances and foster camaraderie. And while the lamb stew might be the star, don't overlook the humble onions and lentils. They're the unsung heroes of this spread, each bite a reminder of the earth's bounty and the labor of the farmers who coax these ingredients from the soil. Now, let's talk about the wine, or, more accurately, the beer. In Uruk, beer is a staple as essential as water, though significantly more enjoyable. Made from barley, this brew is thick, almost porridge-like, and served in communal jars. Drinking from a straw might seem quaint today, but back then, it was the height of sophistication. Each sip is a nod to the gods, a liquid prayer that binds you to your fellow revelers. This evening's gathering isn't just about food and drink, though. it's also a chance to engage in the kind of philosophical banter that would be right at home in a smoky cafe. You discuss everything from the latest omens to the pros and cons of importing copper versus locally sourced materials. You might even touch on the political maneuverings of the governor, carefully couched in the kind of diplomatic language that keeps you in everyone's good graces. But don't be fooled by the convivial atmosphere. Beneath the laughter and the clinking of cups lies a subtle game of influence. Every word, every gesture is a calculated move in the intricate dance of power that defines your life. The priesthood isn't just a spiritual calling, it's a political machine, and tonight's feast is as much about maintaining your status as it is about satisfying your hunger. As the conversation winds down and the evening air grows cooler, you find yourself reflecting on the day's events. The life of a Sumerian priest is anything but serene. A whirlwind of spiritual duties and earthly responsibilities that demands a delicate balance. You're the linchpin in a society where the divine and the mundane are inextricably linked, where every decision is a tightrope walk between maintaining power and ensuring the city's prosperity. It's tempting to romanticize the priestly life as one of quiet contemplation and divine communion, but the reality is far more complex. You're not just a spiritual leader, you're a diplomat, an economist, and a strategist, all rolled into one. It's a role that requires constant vigilance and a knack for navigating the ever-shifting sands of Mesopotamian politics. But here's the thing. The hustle and bustle of maintaining power and influence are precisely what make the priesthood so fascinating. There's a certain romance in the chaos, a beauty in the struggle to balance devotion with governance. And as you sit here, surrounded by your peers, you can't help but marvel at the audacity of it all, the sheer human determination to make sense of a world where gods and men walk side by side. As the embers of the evening fire flicker and die, you rise from your mat, ready to retire for the night. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new omens to interpret, and new alliances to forge. But for now, you allow yourself a moment of quiet reflection, a chance to savor the complexities of a life lived on the edge of the divine and the earthly. And as you lay down to sleep, the city of Uruk slumbering beneath you, you're reminded of the legacy you're helping to shape. The ziggurat, the temple, the bustling markets, all are threads in the rich tapestry of Mesopotamian civilization. Your role, though but a single strand, is integral to the whole, a testament to the enduring power of faith and the unyielding spirit of humanity. So here's to you, the Sumerian priest, a master of diplomacy, a guardian of tradition, and a beacon of wisdom in an ever-changing world. In the grand scheme of history, your story is a reminder that the pursuit of balance between the sacred and the secular, the divine and the mortal, is as timeless as the stars above Uruk, still shining brightly long after the final feast has been served. In the hustle and bustle of 13th century Persia, where politics were as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm, a young boy named Jalal ad-Din Muhammad Rumi was born. Now if you're thinking, oh, Rumi, the poet who drops wisdom like some medieval Confucius, you'd be spot on. But before he became the go-to guy for Instagram captions, he was just a kid navigating a world of chaos and caravans. Born in 1207 in the city of Balkh, which today would be in Afghanistan, but back then was like the Silicon Valley of spirituality, Rumi was thrust into a world as tumultuous as it was inspiring. Balkh, let me tell you, was a melting pot of cultures, religions, and ideas, a cosmopolitan hub where traders swapped stories as much as they did silk. It was a place where, if you threw a rock, you'd probably hit a philosopher, or at least someone who fancied themselves one. Yet, this idyllic intellectual landscape was overshadowed by the looming shadow of the Mongols. Genghis Khan was not exactly known for his subtlety, and his armies were sweeping across the region, making everyone a little on edge, like teens waiting for their parents to come home after they'd thrown a party. Rumi's family, led by his father, Bahaz-ud-Din Walad, decided that sticking around to see if they could outlast the Mongol siege wasn't the best idea. They packed up their belongings and began a journey that would make modern-day road trips look like a walk in the park. This epic trek covered around 1,000 miles, a distance that makes you wonder if they got frequent traveller points. Their destination? Konya, in what is now Turkey, a city promising peace and, crucially, a lack of Mongol hordes. Now, you might picture this migration as a romantic adventure, but let's not kid ourselves. We're talking about a journey through rugged terrain, with the constant threat of bandits, disease, and the ever-annoying problem of finding a decent place to sleep. Economic realities were harsh. Travelling such a distance wasn't cheap. The family, though well off, faced the usual medieval financial burdens, paying for food, shelter, and whatever the 13th century equivalent of a horse Uber was. Amidst these trials, young Rumi was absorbing everything like a sponge at a water spill. Legend has it that he was divinely inspired at a young age, with stories of celestial visions and profound insights. But let's pump the brakes on the mystical tales for a second. The truth is, Rumi was surrounded by a rich educational environment. His father was a noted scholar, and Rumi had access to some of the best teachers and texts of the time. In a place like Balkh, divine inspiration might just have been the result of overhearing a particularly animated debate between two scholars at the local bazaar. As the family settled in Konya, a city that was a bit like the Paris of Anatolia, minus the Eiffel Tower and with more mosques, Rumi continued his education. Konya was a refuge for many fleeing the Mongol advance, and its streets were filled with people who had stories of survival and loss. This melting pot of experiences undoubtedly shaped Rumi's thinking, giving him a perspective that was both broad and deep. Rumi's early life was not the stuff of legend yet, but it was certainly laying the groundwork for the poet he would become. Surrounded by political upheaval, economic challenges, and the cultural tapestry of the Middle East, young Rumi was already learning to see the world through a lens that combined the mystical with the mundane. This duality would become a hallmark of his work, as he learned to find the divine in the everyday and the profound in the simple. In this rich tapestry of history and hardship, Rumi's family journey was more than just a migration. It was the beginning of a path that would lead him to become one of the most beloved poets in history. While the tales of divine inspiration make for a good story, it's the reality of Rumi's early life, filled with challenges, learning, and a relentless pursuit of knowledge, that truly set the stage for his later genius. And so, in a world where poetry was as much a part of life as bread and wine, young Rumi was on his way to finding a voice that would resonate through the centuries. As Rumi settled into life in Konya, the city offered a curious mix of stability and intrigue, much like a medieval version of a Netflix drama set in the heart of the Sultanate of Rum. This was the 13th century, after all, where the local sultans juggled power like circus performers, one eye on the Mongols, the other on their own ambitious courtiers. It wasn't all roses and poetry, it was more like roses, with a side of political thorns. Konya, with its bustling bazaars and aromatic spice markets, was a place where cultures clashed as much as they blended. It was both a refuge and a melting pot, attracting not just those fleeing from the Mongol menace, but also scholars, philosophers, and mystics looking for a bit of peace and quiet to unravel the mysteries of the universe. Imagine the city as a giant intellectual beehive, buzzing with ideas and ready to sting if you got too close to the truth. Rumi, the prodigious son of a renowned scholar, quickly found his place in this intellectual haven. Thanks to his father's reputation, he was thrust into the spotlight of Konya's scholarly circle. But being a respected scholar wasn't just about spouting wisdom like some medieval TED talk. It was a position that came with serious societal clout and, quite frankly, a substantial price tag. Maintaining a reputation required access to books, luxury items in a world before Amazon Prime, and a steady supply of patrons willing to fund your intellectual escapades. Being an esteemed scholar could be as costly as modern-day student loans, minus the graduation cap and gown. And yet, Rumi didn't just survive this academic rat race, he thrived. His teachings drew crowds, and soon enough he was the 13th century equivalent of a rock star, only with more robes and fewer groupies. The man knew how to draw a crowd, and unlike today's pop icons, he didn't need pyrotechnics. Just a well-placed metaphor or an insightful anecdote could do the trick. But let's not get carried away with this image of Rumi as a superstar scholar. It's time to tackle the spicy tales of his fateful meeting with Shams of Tabriz, the man who would become his spiritual mentor and whom legend insists made Rumi's heart skip a beat. Now, the stories of their first encounter are as romanticized as a Hollywood rom-com. Picture it, Shams, the enigmatic wanderer, strolls into town, locks eyes with Rumi, and voila, spiritual fireworks. But let's hold our horses here. The reality, as usual, is a bit more grounded. Shams of Tabriz was indeed a mystic, but more of the wandering sage type than the swooning romantic. His meeting with Rumi is said to have been a game-changer, but it's likely they didn't exchange profound insights over a latte at the local cafe. More plausible is that their interaction was a gradual meeting of minds, with Shams challenging Rumi's conventional views, poking at his intellectual comfort zones like a spiritual provocateur. Despite the romance of their story, what's undeniable is the profound impact Shams had on Rumi's life and work. This wasn't some mystical love story, but a deep, transformative friendship that shook Rumi out of his scholarly complacency and into a realm of spiritual exploration. And while Shams didn't appear out of a mystical mist, his influence was as real as the dust on Konya's streets. Their relationship was less about exchanging glances and more about exchanging ideas, an intellectual tango that would forever change Rumi's approach to spirituality and poetry. But let's not forget the socio-political backdrop of their friendship. The Sultanate of Rum was a complex tapestry of cultures, religions, and political agendas. The Sultanate offered a semblance of stability, but under the surface, tension simmered like a pot about to boil over. Shams and Rumi's bond might have raised eyebrows in a society where conformity often reigned supreme, but their shared journey highlighted a deeper truth, that true insight often comes from challenging the status quo, even if it means making a few enemies along the way. As Rumi delved deeper into his spiritual quest under Shams's tutelage, his work began to reflect this inner transformation. The poetry that emerged was richer, more profound, and resonated with a universal truth that transcended the immediate concerns of Konya's bustling streets. Rumi's verses began to dance with a rhythm that spoke to the soul, capturing the essence of human experience with a clarity that was both simple and profound. So, as we leave Rumi and Shams amidst the swirling dust of Konya, remember that their story is both legend and reality, a tapestry woven with threads of myth and truth. And while the tales of their first meeting might be embellished, the impact of their relationship is undeniable. In a world where the divine often seemed distant, they found the sacred in the everyday, teaching us that sometimes the most profound journeys are those that challenge us to see beyond what we know. There's more to come as Rumi's story unfolds, revealing how the seeds planted in Konya would grow into a legacy that continues to resonate through the ages. As we pause here, ready to pick up the thread in the next part, keep in mind that this isn't just history. It's a reminder that in the chaos of life, there's always room for a little bit of poetry. Just as we're about to dive deeper into the whirlwind that was Rumi and Shams's friendship, let's get something straight. Their connection was like a lightning bolt in an otherwise cloudy sky. It wasn't just a meeting of minds, it was an intellectual cage match. Shams of Tabriz, with his wild, untamed spirit, challenged Rumi in ways the poet had never imagined. This wasn't your standard mentor-student dynamic. It was more like a philosophical boot camp where Shams served as the drill sergeant and Rumi, the willing recruit, was pushed to the brink and then some. Now, if you think their bond was all sunshine and roses, think again. Not everyone in Konya was thrilled with Shams's influence. Imagine the scene, a city bustling with scholars and traders, and here comes this mystic from Tabriz, shaking things up like a blender in a smoothie shop. Shams had a knack for asking the kind of questions that made people uncomfortable, which is a polite way of saying he could make a room full of scholars squirm like worms on hot asphalt. But why the discomfort? It wasn't just because Shams was a provocateur, it was the unsettling way he challenged the established norms. You know, the kind of norms that kept the social and religious order in check. The duo's intense bond stirred envy and suspicion among Rumi's circle. Imagine folks whispering, "Is this Tabriz guy leading our beloved scholar astray?" It was like a medieval version of a scandalous celebrity friendship, with the rumour mill working overtime. This skepticism wasn't just about personal dislike. The economic and social implications were real. Rumi, by then a well-respected figure, had patrons who funded his lectures and spiritual gatherings. These patrons weren't keen on their investment, their go-to guru being monopolized by a wandering mystic. After all, supporting scholars wasn't a purely altruistic exercise. It translated into social capital, and with Rumi's attention diverted, that capital was losing value faster than a stock in a bear market. The financial aspect of their friendship is often glossed over in the romantic retellings. But money matters, folks. Then, as much as today. As Rumi delved deeper into the mystical teachings Shams introduced him to, he began to prioritize spiritual exploration over traditional scholarship. This shift didn't sit well with everyone, especially those who had a stake in his public persona as a learned scholar. The economic implications were clear. Fewer public lectures meant fewer donations. It's one thing to be a spiritual guru, it's another to pay the bills. Despite the societal and economic backlash, Rumi wasn't about to let go of the transformative power of Shams's influence. The friendship sparked a creative explosion within Rumi that was nothing short of meteoric. His poetry took on new dimensions, infused with a depth and intensity previously unseen. The man was on fire, figuratively speaking, churning out verses like a medieval Bob Dylan on a particularly inspired day. Rumi's work, post-Shams, was imbued with a longing and an introspection that resonated with people far beyond the borders of Konya. Yet the cost of this creative renaissance was high. Shams's presence in Rumi's life stirred public disapproval like a storm cloud hanging over their heads. The citizens of Konya weren't shy about expressing their discontent. This was a society with rigid hierarchies and defined social roles, and Shams's influence on Rumi blurred these lines, causing more than a few raised eyebrows. It was like watching a traditional play and suddenly the lead actor decides to improvise. Intriguing to some, infuriating to others. The backlash reached a crescendo when Shams disappeared from Konya under mysterious circumstances. Some accounts suggest he left voluntarily, while others hint at foul play by those threatened by his influence on Rumi. Regardless of the cause, his absence left a void in Rumi's life and work. It was a loss that felt like a missing puzzle piece. The kind you search for endlessly, knowing you might never find it again. Rumi's poetry during this period reflects a profound sense of longing, a yearning for the return of his spiritual companion. But let's not get too lost in the weeds of tragedy. Shams's departure didn't put an end to Rumi's poetic journey. On the contrary, it fueled it. The loss became a catalyst, driving Rumi to explore even deeper spiritual realms through his writing. Like a phoenix rising from the ashes, Rumi's creativity soared to new heights, producing works that would cement his legacy. His verses, filled with passion and insight, continued to capture the hearts of those who read them. As Rumi navigated this new chapter, the economic realities remained ever present. Without Shams, Rumi had to balance his spiritual pursuits with the practicalities of maintaining his household and scholarly commitments. Patronage was a double-edged sword. It provided financial stability, but also came with expectations. Rumi, ever the spiritual maverick, managed to walk this tightrope, ensuring that his financial obligations were met without compromising his newfound spiritual path. In understanding the impact of Shams on Rumi's life, we must strip away the romantic veneer and recognize the tangible sacrifices involved. Their friendship wasn't just a mystical connection, it was a seismic shift rippling through the cultural and economic landscape of Konya. This was a relationship that defied convention, one that demanded personal sacrifices and challenged societal norms. Theirs was a rare bond, the kind that ignites the soul and transforms the mundane into the extraordinary. As we leave Rumi and Shams at this juncture, with Rumi channeling his longing into breathtaking poetry, it's clear that their story is far from over. The legacy of their friendship continues to echo through time, a testament to the power of connection and the courage to defy societal expectations. We'll pick up the threads in the next part, where Rumi's journey unfolds further, revealing new layers of spiritual and poetic depth. Until then, remember, in the dance of life, sometimes the steps you take with others make all the difference. As we rejoin Rumi on his poetic odyssey, the air is thick with the echoes of Shams's departure, a catalyst that sparked both a creative inferno and a spiritual awakening. Post-Shams, Rumi wasn't just churning out poetry, he was crafting a legacy, one quatrain at a time. But here's where things take a fascinating turn. Rumi wasn't just scribbling verses in solitude. He was laying the groundwork for a movement that would reverberate through the ages, the Mevlevi order, or as some might recognize it, the whirling dervishes. Now, before you start picturing twirling mystics in a trance, let's slice through the romantic fog and get down to brass tacks. Establishing the Mevlevi order wasn't an exercise in mystical escapism, it was a masterclass in logistical acrobatics. Imagine juggling spiritual aspirations with the harsh economic realities of 13th century Konya. Rumi had to transform his poetic musings into a sustainable community, a bit like turning a garage band into a global phenomenon, but without the help of social media influencers. Here's where the economic context gets juicy. Founding a spiritual order in medieval Anatolia meant not only attracting followers but also securing patrons who could bankroll the endeavor. Remember, Rumi was no stranger to the financial tightrope. His earlier experiences taught him that even the most profound spiritual journey had a price tag. And speaking of numbers, let's talk figures. Maintaining a spiritual community was no small feat. We're talking about feeding, housing, and clothing numerous devotees, all while ensuring that the poetic flame didn't flicker out due to fiscal neglect. To appreciate Rumi's genius, you have to understand the innovative economic model he employed. The Mevlevi order was sustained through a combination of charitable donations, endowments, and what we might call today the medieval version of crowdfunding. Wealthy patrons, drawn to the spiritual allure and intellectual prestige of Rumi's teachings, contributed generously, allowing the order to thrive. But don't be fooled into thinking it was all about the dinars. Rumi's charisma and the spiritual depth of his poetry were the real currency, attracting people from all walks of life. Yet, for all his spiritual prowess and poetic genius, Rumi was no miracle worker. Debunking myths is my jam, so let's tackle the notion that Rumi possessed mystical powers that could bend reality to his will. The legend of Rumi as a sorcerer-like figure, capable of conjuring bread from thin air or making the rain dance to his tunes, is as enchanting as it is exaggerated. The truth is far more grounded. Rumi's magic lay in his ability to connect deeply with others and inspire them to see the divine within the mundane, not in performing party tricks that defied the laws of physics. In reality, sustaining a spiritual community was a grind, filled with daily challenges that would test the patience of the saint. Picture the logistics of managing a growing group of devotees, ensuring everyone had enough to eat, maintaining the buildings, and dealing with the occasional grumbling member who didn't quite share Rumi's ethereal vision. It was like running a small city, with all the bureaucratic headaches that came with it. And let's not forget the political landscape. Always a simmering stew of intrigue and power plays. The Sultanate of Rum wasn't exactly a bastion of stability, and navigating its shifting tides required both savvy and subtlety. The Mevlevi order, however, was more than just a spiritual retreat, it was a cultural epicenter. Rumi's teachings blended philosophical inquiry with profound spiritual insight, creating a tapestry of thought that drew intellectuals and mystics alike. The order became a beacon for those seeking a deeper understanding of the human experience, a refuge from the chaos of the world outside. And while the whirling dance made famous by the Mevlevi dervishes might seem like a whimsical flourish, it was, in fact, a physical manifestation of Rumi's teachings, an expression of the soul's yearning for unity with the divine. But let's not get too swept away by the poetry of it all. Behind the scenes, Rumi was a master of balancing the spiritual with the practical. His ability to navigate the economic realities of his time ensured the order's survival. This wasn't just about maintaining the status quo, it was about creating a sustainable legacy that would endure long after he was gone. As Rumi's influence grew, so did the myths surrounding him. The stories of his mystical abilities, while captivating, often overshadowed the very real challenges he faced. It's a classic case of the legend eclipsing the man. But if we strip away the layers of myth, what we find is a figure who was as much a product of his time as he was a shaper of it. Rumi's genius lay not in otherworldly powers, but in his profound understanding of the human condition and his ability to articulate it in a way that resonated across cultures and centuries. And here's the kicker. Rumi's story, with all its twists and turns, is a testament to the power of resilience and adaptability. In a world where nothing was certain, where politics were a constant gamble and economic stability was as elusive as a desert mirage, Rumi managed to create something enduring. The Mevlevi order wasn't just his legacy, it was a living testament to the power of poetry to transcend the limitations of its time. But don't pack up your mental suitcase just yet. Rumi's journey doesn't end here. As we inch closer to the final chapter of his story, we'll delve deeper into the impact of his work and the ways in which his legacy continues to inspire. So stay tuned, because the dance of history is far from over, and Rumi's footsteps still echo in the corridors of time, reminding us that even amidst the chaos, there's always room for a little bit of poetry. As we dance into the final act of Rumi's story, let's confront the elephant in the room, the modern Rumi phenomenon. It's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? Rumi, the medieval Persian poet and Sufi mystic, has become the poster child for everything from Eastern wisdom to motivational quotes on social media. He's the Shakespeare of the spiritual world, but with more hashtags. Yet, there's a historical chasm between the Rumi of then and the Rumi of now, and it's one worth exploring. Start with the fact that Rumi wrote in Persian, yet today his poems are predominantly consumed in English. The translations, while beautifully crafted, often gloss over the linguistic nuances and cultural context that give his work its original flavor. It's like reading Shakespeare in emojis, something gets lost in translation. Take the famous line, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." A poignant sentiment, sure, but the original Persian carries layers of metaphor deeply rooted in Islamic mysticism, layers that sometimes get sanded down in translation to fit a more generalized spiritual aesthetic. And then there's the issue of commodification. Let's not mince words. Rumi has been commercialized like a rock star, his verses appearing on everything from coffee mugs to luxury yoga mats. This commercialization, while spreading his work far and wide, often strips it of the very essence that made it profound. Rumi's teachings were not just feel-good snippets, they were deeply entrenched in the Sufi tradition, aimed at guiding spiritual seekers through the complexities of life and faith. In a sense, the modern Rumi is a victim of his own success, his profound insights repackaged for a consumer culture that favors catchy one-liners over philosophical depth. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Despite this commodification, the fact that Rumi's work continues to captivate millions speaks to its enduring power. It's like a hit song that transcends its genre, appealing to audiences across time and culture. The universality of Rumi's themes, love, loss, longing, and unity, resonates with fundamental human experiences, bridging the gap between the 13th century and today's digital age. It's a testament to the timelessness of his insights, even if the packaging sometimes misses the mark. Now, let's tackle the myth of Rumi as a universally loved figure. The truth is a bit more nuanced. In his own time, Rumi's teachings were revolutionary, challenging established religious and social norms. His embrace of Sufi mysticism, with its focus on the personal experience of the divine, didn't always sit well with more orthodox Islamic scholars. If Twitter existed back then, you can bet Rumi would have been the subject of many a heated thread. His ideas weren't universally accepted, they were as divisive as they were enlightening, drawing both followers and critics. Fast forward to today, and Rumi's work is celebrated across religious and cultural divides. But this universal appeal is a double-edged sword. While his poetry fosters understanding and connection, it's also used to paint a simplistic picture of a world where all differences can be hugged away. The reality is far more complex. Rumi's work does call for unity, but it also demands introspection and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths, something that often gets lost in the feel-good haze of his modern reinterpretations. So, why does Rumi remain relevant today? Perhaps it's precisely because of this tension between myth and reality. His work offers both a mirror and a window, a mirror reflecting our own inner struggles and a window into a world where those struggles are part of a larger, divine tapestry. Rumi invites us to look beyond the surface, to seek the divine in the mundane, much like he did in his own time. The mythologization of his persona, while sometimes distorting his true teachings, keeps his work in the public eye, continually inviting new generations to explore its depths. And here's the kicker. Rumi's legacy is as much about the questions it raises as the answers it provides. In a world where certainty is often elusive, his work encourages us to embrace the mysteries of life, to find beauty in the unknown, and to dance with the paradoxes that define the human experience. It's a reminder that in the chaos of history and the complexities of modern life, there's always room for a little bit of poetry, a dance between the myth and the man that continues to captivate and inspire. As we wrap up this journey through Rumi's life and legacy, it's clear that his story is far from over. His words continue to echo through time, a testament to the power of poetry to transcend the boundaries of language, culture, and time. So the next time you stumble upon a Rumi quote on your social feed, take a moment to ponder the rich tapestry of history and humanity behind it. Because Rumi, in all his complexity, offers us not just words to live by, but a world to explore. One where every wound is a doorway, every longing a path, and every dance a step toward understanding. The rooster's crow isn't just an alarm clock. It's a signal that Florence is already buzzing with life, and so should you be. As a banker in the 14th century in this city of intrigue and opportunity, the dawn chorus is your cue to rise and shine, or at least rise. Forget the snooze button, that's centuries away. Instead, you're greeted by the sounds of merchants setting up shop and the occasional clatter of a horse-drawn cart navigating the narrow cobblestone streets. Florence isn't just waking up, it's flexing its muscles as the financial titan of Europe. You step out onto your balcony, modest by modern standards but practically palatial for your time. The Arno River glimmers in the morning sun, a reminder of both commerce and chaos. Consider it the lifeblood of your city, carrying goods, wealth, and sometimes less savoury things. Ah, the sweet smell of opportunity and, occasionally, raw sewage. Today isn't just another day at the bank for you. It's a chance to navigate the dizzying heights of Renaissance finance, where the currency isn't just gold and silver, but trust and cunning. Here's the thing about 14th century Florence. It's like Wall Street, but with more velvet and significantly fewer regulations. And you're right in the middle of it all, a cog in the grand machine of Florentine banking. The Medici family is just starting to make waves, but don't let their fame fool you. The banking world is not all glamour and gilded coins. It's cutthroat, and you need to keep your wits sharper than the tools of a blacksmith working on Brunelleschi's next masterpiece. Not too far from your doorstep is the Ponte Vecchio, the famous bridge that doubles as a marketplace, its arches crammed with shops. Here, commerce is king, and gold florins are the royal decree. Speaking of florins, let's talk about currency. The gold florin is the euro of its day, universally recognized and accepted. It's been around since 12052, weighing in at about 3.5 grams of almost pure gold. It's small but mighty, like a financial David in a world full of Goliaths. As you navigate through the streets, dodging the odd pile of refuse, thanks to the lack of a modern waste disposal system, you're reminded of why Florence is the epicenter of banking. It's not just the strategic location or the industrious people, it's the sheer brilliance of Florentine innovation. Double-entry bookkeeping, bills of exchange. Florence is basically inventing modern banking, one ledger at a time. These innovations aren't just about keeping track of who owes whom. They're the tools that will build empires. Now, about the Medici family. Florence's answer to the Kardashians, but with more political finesse and fewer reality TV shows. They're just starting to climb the social ladder, but their influence will soon be as omnipresent as the city's iconic red-tiled roofs. Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici is the man of the hour, turning his modest banking operation into a financial powerhouse. You might even run into him at the Palazzo Vecchio, where city business is conducted. But don't expect him to notice you. Giovanni plays his cards close to his chest, and he's got bigger fish to fry. Florence, though beautiful, is not a utopia. For every silk-clad noble, there's a struggling artisan trying to make ends meet. And as much as you might romanticize the grandeur of it all, there's a harsh reality under the glittering surface. The economy is as fragile as a glass goblet. A bad harvest or a bout of the plague, which has a nasty habit of popping up like an unwanted house guest, can send everything into a tailspin. As you stroll toward your bank, a modest but bustling room filled with the scent of ink and ambition, you're reminded of why you're here. Banking isn't just about counting coins, it's about managing risk and relationships. You're not just holding on to money, you're holding on to the trust of the people who come to you, hoping their florins will multiply like rabbits. It's a delicate dance of diplomacy and daring, and you've got to be light on your feet. The day is young, and Florence is calling. With a city so full of life, every corner turned is a new story waiting to unfold. As you navigate through the rhythm of daily life, remember this. In a world where fortunes are made and lost faster than you can say interest rates, your sharp mind and adaptability are your greatest assets. So, keep your eyes on the coins and your ears open to the whispers of opportunity. Florence never sleeps, and neither should you. At least not until the day's business is done. And just like that, you're at the heart of Florence's financial world, a place where fortunes are made as easily as they're lost, and secrets are traded like the latest gossip. It's not your typical 9 to 5, it's more of a sunrise to stars kind of gig, but who's counting hours when you're counting florins? Welcome to the bustling banks of the Arno River, the Wall Street of the Renaissance, minus the skyscrapers but with a lot more character. Your office is a modest space, yet it's the epicenter of the city's buzzing financial hive. Here, the air is thick with the smell of ink, parchment, and ambition. It's a place where numbers dance elegantly on ledgers, and every transaction tells a tale of trust, risk, and the occasional scandal. You're not just juggling coins, you're orchestrating a symphony of financial instruments, each with its own unique melody. Now, let's unravel the intricacies of one of your favorite tools, the bill of exchange. Think of it as a promissory note on steroids. It's a magical piece of paper that allows you to pay someone in another city without hauling a treasure chest across treacherous roads. Picture this. You, sitting at your desk, crafting a bill that promises payment in Venice or Bruges. This isn't just a convenience, it's a revolutionary step in the evolution of credit systems, allowing trade to flourish far beyond the borders of Florence. But with great power comes great responsibility and risk. Trust is the currency here as much as gold is. If a merchant fails to honor a bill of exchange, it's not just his reputation on the line, it's yours as well. The stakes are high, and the margins are razor thin. You must navigate this delicate web with the precision of a tightrope walker, balancing between profit and peril. On any given day, your clientele is a diverse bunch. From silk merchants looking to finance their next shipment to artisans in need of a loan for new tools, they all come through your door, eyes gleaming with dreams of prosperity. Yet, beneath the surface, there's an ever-present tension. The economy is a fickle beast, and a bad harvest or political upheaval could send it into a tailspin faster than a Florentine can say, catastrophe. Ah, loans and investments, the heartbeat of your daily grind. This is where the real game is played, behind closed doors and whispered conversations. Every loan is a gamble, a bet on the borrower's ability to repay. You weigh their requests against their reputation, past dealings, and sometimes a gut feeling. Sure, the allure of interest is tempting, but let's not kid ourselves. You're not just a banker, you're a gambler in a velvet doublet, placing bets on the future. And speaking of future bets, let's chat about the socio-political clout wielded by folks in your profession. Banking isn't just a business, it's a ticket to influence and power. You're not merely managing money, you're managing people and politics. Your financial backing can make or break a politician's career, and in a city like Florence, that's a mighty sword to wield. But tread carefully. Today's ally can be tomorrow's adversary. The truth is, the romanticized notion of banking opulence is as much a myth as the fountain of youth. Sure, there are moments of grandeur, fine clothes, lavish banquets, and the occasional piece of art commissioned to show off your status. Yet beneath this polished veneer lies a world fraught with risk and the potential for scandal. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and it could all come crashing down like a poorly constructed house of cards. You heard the whispers, the hushed conversations about those who flew too close to the sun, bankers who gambled too boldly or trusted too easily, only to find themselves in financial ruin. In this world there's a fine line between fortune and fiasco. It's a delicate dance, and you must remain light on your feet, ever watchful for the next opportunity or threat. Yet, despite the risks, there's something inherently thrilling about this life. Each day is a new chapter, a fresh canvas on which to paint your financial masterwork. Florence, with its vibrant pulse and unyielding energy, is your playground, and you are one of its key players, turning the wheels of commerce in a city that never truly sleeps. So, as the sun sets over the Arno and the city's lights begin to twinkle like stars fallen from the sky, you can take a moment to reflect on the intricate dance of numbers and people that defines your world. It's a tale of ambition, power, and the relentless pursuit of prosperity, in a city where opportunity flows as freely as the river itself. The story of Florence is far from over, and neither is yours. Tomorrow promises another day of intrigue, challenge, and the endless pursuit of success in the world of Renaissance finance. As the sun reaches its zenith, casting a golden glow over Florence, you decide it's time to step away from the clutches of ledgers and coins. After all, even the most dedicated bankers need a breather. Florence isn't just a financial powerhouse, it's a tapestry of culture and commerce, woven together in a dizzying dance of colour and sound. So, you make your way to the heart of the city, the bustling market square, where merchants, artisans and dreamers converge in a cacophony of human enterprise. The market is a sensory overload. The air is thick with the aroma of freshly baked bread, mingling with the sharp tang of olives and cheese. Stallholders shout their wares, each trying to outdo the other in a symphony of salesmanship. If you've ever wondered where capitalism got its start, look no further. Here, florins change hands faster than gossip, and every transaction is a mini-drama of haggling and handshakes. Florence is a city where ideas flow as freely as the Arno, and the market is the perfect stage for this. You overhear snippets of conversation in a dozen languages, Greek, Arabic, and the ever-present Latin, all blending into a harmonious chaos. This is the crossroads of the world, where East meets West, and goods aren't the only things exchanged. Knowledge, too, is bartered here, in whispered corners and clandestine meetings. It's impossible to miss the influence of the church, looming large over both the market and your wallet. The cathedral spire casts a long shadow, a reminder that while the soul is eternal, the church's coffers are always in need of filling. The church's stance on usury is legendary. Lending money at interest is a sin, they say, but they conveniently forget to mention that the Vatican itself has quite the taste for Florentine banking services. Hypocrisy. Thy name is ecclesiastical finance. You see, the church has a love-hate relationship with money. They condemn usury in public sermons, yet behind closed doors, they're the best clients a banker like you could hope for. It's a bit like a diet that allows for the occasional cheat day, only here the indulgence is in gold florins rather than chocolate cake. Heaven might be the ultimate goal, but a comfortable life on earth seems pretty appealing too. The market isn't just about buying and selling, it's a microcosm of the social fabric of Florence. Here you witness the burgeoning relationship between commerce and art. Artisans display their creations, jewelry, paintings, sculptures, each piece a testament to human creativity and a nod to the patrons who make it possible. These patrons, often bankers themselves, have a vested interest in the arts. After all, a well-placed fresco in a cathedral or a statue in a piazza is as much an advertisement for their influence as it is a gift to the city. Patronage isn't purely altruistic, of course. It's a strategic investment, a way to cement one's legacy in stone and pigment. The Medici, those cunning social climbers, are masters of this game, commissioning works that will outlast their mortal coils. But don't let the romanticized image fool you. Behind every masterpiece is a ledger, and every commission is carefully calculated for maximum social return. This intersection of commerce and art is the beating heart of the Renaissance. It's a time when a banker's ledger can hold as much sway as a duke's sword, a fact not lost on the artists who flock to Florence, seeking both patronage and inspiration. Here, art isn't just decoration, it's a currency of its own, one that can elevate a family's status or secure a dynasty's future. Yet, not everything about Florentine bankers is as gilded as a Botticelli. The myth of the banker as a benevolent city patron is a well-spun tale. Sure, they fund cathedrals and commission paintings, but this isn't purely out of the goodness of their hearts. It's an investment in prestige, a way to ensure that their names are whispered with reverence long after they're gone. The reality is less poetic. Beneath the marble and fresco lies a web of ambition, power, and, yes, a bit of self-interest. As you wander through the market, you're reminded that Florence is a city of contradictions. It's a place where beauty and brutality share the same space, where the pursuit of profit doesn't preclude the appreciation of art. It's a delicate balance, a dance as intricate as the frescoes adorning the city's walls. And you, with your sharp mind and sharper instincts, are a part of this grand tapestry. So, as you contemplate the mingling of art and finance, the myths and realities of patronage, you can't help but marvel at the complexity of it all. Florence is a city that defies easy categorization, a place where every stone tells a story, and every transaction is a piece of a larger puzzle. It's a world where fortunes are made and lost in the blink of an eye, where beauty and commerce intertwine in a dance as old as time. And as you make your way back to the bank, you carry with you the echoes of the market, a reminder of the city's vibrant pulse, and the role you play in its ever-unfolding story. As the echoes of the market's hustle and bustle fade, you slip back into the familiar rhythm of your office, where the afternoon awaits with its own brand of chaos. Here, in the heart of Florence's banking district, your desk is not just a piece of furniture, but a command centre in the ongoing battle of commerce and politics. The scent of ink and parchment greets you like an old friend or a persistent shadow, always lurking, never quite leaving. You've got a stack of correspondence thicker than a medieval manuscript, each letter a small drama of its own. The wax seals of rival banking families stare back at you like the eyes of watchful hawks, each one a reminder of the intricate web of alliances and enmities that define your world. The Patsy, the Bardi, the Strossi names that could either be on your side today or plotting your undoing tomorrow. It's a high-stakes game of chess, and you're both the player and the pawn. Florentine banking isn't just about balancing accounts, it's about balancing on a knife's edge. You're not merely dealing with numbers, but with the egos and ambitions that come with them. Each letter, each transaction, is a thread in the larger tapestry of power and influence that stretches from your humble office to the gilded halls of the papacy and beyond. Speaking of the papacy, here's a juicy tidbit. Your role as a banker means you're not just a cog in the Florentine machine, but a player on the European stage. The Vatican, with its insatiable appetite for funds, often turns to the likes of you for loans that would make even the most audacious gambler balk. And why wouldn't they? With Rome as your debtor, you've got leverage that's worth more than any pile of gold florins. But let's not get too starry-eyed. You're playing with fire, and the church isn't exactly known for its forgiving nature. One misstep, and you could find yourself not only out of pocket but out of favour, potentially exiled faster than you can say excommunication. It's a precarious balance of risk and reward, where the stakes are as high as the spires of Florence's Duomo. Yet, the allure of power is intoxicating. Your influence extends beyond the borders of Italy, touching the courts of France, England, and beyond. Each loan you grant, each letter of credit you issue, is a silent whisper of Florentine influence in the corridors of European power. You're not just financing trade, you're financing history. The tension between banking families and political factions is as palpable as the tension in your shoulders from a long day at the desk. The Medici might be the rising stars, but they're not without their rivals. Every deal you make is a potential alliance, or a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at the slightest provocation. It's like a Renaissance soap opera, only with more velvet and slightly less melodrama. But don't be fooled by the veneer of opulence. Beneath the facade of wealth lies a world fraught with danger. Financial ruin is just a bad deal away, and political exile is a sword that hangs over every banker's head like a particularly ominous cloud. It's not just about counting coins, it's about counting the cost of your decisions in a world where loyalty is as fleeting as a Florentine summer breeze. Strategic alliances are your lifeline, your safety net in the perilous world of Renaissance finance. You've got to know who to trust, who to watch, and who to keep at arm's length. Your network is your greatest asset, a web of relationships that can either catch you in a fall or ensnare you in a scandal. And let's not forget the personal risks. The myth of the untouchable banker is as much a fairy tale as a happily ever after ending. You're walking a tightrope, juggling fortunes and futures with the dexterity of a street performer. One wrong move, and it's not just your career on the line, but your very existence in the city you call home. Yet, despite the risks, there's a thrill to it all, a sense of adventure in the unknown, a challenge in the chaos. You're not just a banker, you're a navigator in the uncharted waters of economic possibility. Each day is a new chapter in the epic tale of Florentine finance, a story where you're both the author and the protagonist. So, as the sun dips lower in the sky and the shadows lengthen across the city, you lean back in your chair and survey the battlefield of ledgers and letters before you. It's a world of intrigue and ambition, where fortunes are made and lost with the stroke of a quill. And as you prepare for yet another round in the grand game of banking, one thing is certain. In Florence, the only constant is change, and the only certainty is uncertainty. The dance continues, and you wouldn't have it any other way. As you sit there, the weight of Florence's financial world balanced delicately on your ink-stained fingers, it's time to step back and take stock of this high-wire act you call a career. Banking in Florence is no mere occupation, it's a calling. But before you get too misty-eyed about your place in the Renaissance, let's dig into the gritty, glorious legacy you're helping to build. First off, let's talk innovation. Florence didn't just dip its toes into the pool of modern banking, it cannonballed in, turning heads and ruffling feathers across Europe. Double-entry bookkeeping? That's your bread and butter. It may sound as exciting as watching paint dry, but this little trick of the trade is revolutionizing how money moves. It's like giving bankers a crystal ball, one that shows both sides of the coin, literally and metaphorically. Thanks to this nifty system, you can finally see how much you owe versus how much you own. That's right, transparency in finance. What a novel concept. And then there's the bill of exchange, your secret weapon in the war against the tyranny of distance. No more lugging around sacks of gold like some unfortunate medieval pack mule. Instead, you've got a piece of parchment that says, I owe you, payable in Venice or Bruges or wherever else your business whims take you. This little innovation is not just about convenience, it's about safety. Highways in the 14th century aren't exactly the safest places. Think of them as the Wild West with more mud and fewer saloons. So, keeping your wealth on paper rather than in a chest is a game changer. But let's not get too caught up in the mechanics. What about the people behind the paper? Ah yes, the bankers themselves. Here's a juicy myth to debunk, the idea of the banker as a benevolent Renaissance man, a patron of the arts and a pillar of society. Sure, you've got your name on a couple of stunning frescoes, but let's be real. Your charitable endeavours come with strings attached, often as thick as those ropes tying your fortunes to the political winds. You're not just commissioning art for art's sake. It's a strategic move, a way to plaster your name across history and ensure that the Medici or Strozzi have a little something to remember you by when it comes time to cash in a favour. Let's not sugarcoat it, banking is ruthless. It's a profession where profit often trumps ethics, and the line between the two is as blurry as a Florentine fog. Lending money at interest is technically a sin, according to the church, but it's also the cornerstone of your business model. Hypocrisy? Perhaps. Necessary evil? Absolutely. And here's the kicker, the church, in all its sanctimonious splendour, is one of your best customers. They condemn usury publicly, but in private, they're all too happy to line their sacred coffers with interest-laden florins. It's a delicate dance of ethics and economics, and you're leading the waltz. Now, let's pull back and consider the bigger picture, the legacy of Florentine banking. It's not just about the florins in your coffers or the frescoes on the walls. It's about shaping the modern financial landscape. Your innovations in credit and currency are laying the groundwork for a global economy, one that will eventually span oceans and continents. The Renaissance is more than a cultural rebirth. It's an economic revolution, and you're one of its architects. But what does it all mean for Florence? What does this swirling vortex of money, power, and art mean for the city's future? On the one hand, you're laying the foundations for a prosperous Florence, a city that will outshine its rivals and set the standard for commerce and culture. On the other hand, the very fabric of this prosperity is woven with threads of tension and contradiction. The balance between innovation and tradition, between profit and ethics, is a tightrope walk with no safety net. So, as you close up shop for the day, the shadows lengthening across your desk, you take a moment to reflect. Your role in this grand tapestry is both exhilarating and exhausting. You're a part of something much larger than yourself, a legacy that will echo through the ages, long after the ink on your ledgers has faded. It's a legacy of innovation, yes, but also of complexity and contradiction. And there it is, the bittersweet truth about life as a Florentine banker. You're both a creator and a custodian, a visionary and a pragmatist. You're crafting a future that's as uncertain as it is exciting. A future where the only constant is change. As you step out into the cool evening air, the city's lights twinkling like stars fallen from the heavens, you carry with you the weight of this legacy and the promise of another day in the world of Renaissance finance. Florence's story is far from over, and neither is yours. As the Arno flows endlessly on, so too does the dance of commerce and creativity, a dance you're proud to be a part of. Henry VIII's life ticked off like a medieval soap opera, but with more velvet and less subtlety. Born on June 28, 1491, in the Palace of Placentia, he was the second son of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. Now, being the second son meant young Henry was the spare, not the heir. His older brother Arthur had the dubious honour of being the one groomed for the throne. Henry was more like the royal insurance policy, kept around for emergencies but never expected to do much more than look princely and avoid scandal. And he had a pretty cushy life set up for him, destined for the church, because what else do you do with a spare royal? But fate, that fickle architect of dramatic plot twists, had other ideas. In 1502, Arthur caught a nasty case of what historians think was tuberculosis, although back then they might have just called it the sweating sickness or something nasty. Arthur died at the tender age of 15, leaving a 10-year-old Henry to stow away his choir-boy dreams and get ready for the big leagues. Suddenly, the young Duke of York was next in line for the crown, and the entire kingdom shifted its gaze to him. Talk about pressure! Henry's unexpected rise to power was like being handed the keys to a Ferrari when all you've driven is a donkey cart. And boy, did he rev that engine. Fast forward to 59, just 7 years after Arthur's death, and Henry's on the verge of coronation. He was now 17, standing 6 feet tall, with a love for sports and music that was only rivaled by his passion for, well, anything that screamed, "Look at me, I'm the king!" When his father, Henry VII, died on April 21st, 59, it was time for Henry to trade in his princely robes for the full kingly regalia. Now, Henry wasn't one to do things by halves. His coronation on June 24th, 59, was nothing short of a blockbuster event, fit for the Renaissance rock star he aspired to be. We're talking about a procession that was the medieval equivalent of the Oscars, glittering jewels, endless feasts, and a guest list that could rival any modern royal wedding. The costs were staggering, but hey, if you're going to start a reign, why not start with a bang? The ceremony took place at Westminster Abbey, and as much as we love to romanticize the past, it probably smelled like every nobleman in England had brought their favourite unwashed cloak to the party. But that didn't matter. Henry's day was a spectacle of pageantry, a clear message that he was a king who knew how to put on a show. Henry wasn't just about pomp and circumstance, though. Behind the scenes, he was determined to make England a Renaissance powerhouse. He fancied himself a modern monarch, a king in touch with the arts and sciences, which was a nice way of saying he liked to spend money on shiny things and smart people. He patronized scholars, artists, and musicians, building up his court as a vibrant hub of cultural activity. He wanted England to be the Renaissance equivalent of Silicon Valley, except with more codpieces and less Wi-Fi. He invited thinkers like Erasmus and Thomas More into his circle, lavishing them with attention in exchange for their intellectual prowess. Economically, Henry's reign was a balancing act that would make a tightrope walker jealous. On one hand, he was spending like a kid in a candy store. On the other, he had to make sure the kingdom didn't go broke. The treasury he inherited from his father was in relatively good shape, but Henry had grand plans that required serious cash flow. Wars, castles, and fancy clothes don't come cheap, and even a king has to count his crowns. So, he did what any self-respecting monarch would do. He squeezed every penny he could out of his subjects. Taxes were high, and Henry wasn't shy about enforcing them. It's no wonder some folks thought twice about inviting him to their feasts. Yet, despite the economic pressures, Henry was determined to leave his mark on the world stage. He was an ambitious young monarch with a flair for diplomacy, or at least a desire to make sure everyone knew England was not to be trifled with. He forged alliances, such as his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, Arthur's widow, which was as much about politics as it was about anything else. Catherine was a Spanish princess, and marrying her meant a powerful alliance with Spain. Plus, it was a neat way to tidy up the loose ends left by Arthur's untimely demise. But Henry wasn't just a king of grand ambitions, he was a man of grand appetites. He loved food, sport, and entertainment, indulging in them with the kind of enthusiasm that made him both a beloved and controversial figure. His court was a place where jousts were as common as banquets, and where music and dance filled the halls with a vibrancy that reflected Henry's own larger-than-life personality. In these early years, Henry's reign was a kaleidoscope of energy and excess, a young king finding his footing in a world eager to see what he would do next. He was a ruler who embraced the new age with open arms, eager to prove that he was not just a king by default, but a monarch who could shape the destiny of his nation. And while the fairy tale might paint him as the dashing young king with the golden touch, the reality was a bit more complex, a mix of ambition, extravagance, and the ever-present shadow of the crown's demands. Henry VIII was on his way to becoming one of the most infamous monarchs in history, and the world was watching, popcorn in hand, ready for the spectacle to unfold. Henry VIII, the poster child for royal drama, had a knack for making headlines even in an era before tabloids. As the world settled in with popcorn in hand, waiting to see what he would do next, Henry turned his attention to matrimonial matters. Now, Henry wasn't exactly a romantic. His marriages were more like chess moves than love stories. Enter Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess and widow of Henry's older brother Arthur. Marrying her wasn't just a matter of convenience. It was a political power play to keep England cosy with Spain, a heavyweight on the European stage. But Henry's marriage to Catherine was destined to be the opening act in a saga that would make any soap opera look like child's play. The union with Catherine started off well enough. They tied the knot on June 11, 1559, and for a while it was all marital bliss, or at least as blissful as a political marriage could be. Catherine was 5 years Henry's senior, but she brought with her a dowry that padded the royal coffers, not to mention a connection to the Spanish throne that made other European monarchs sit up and take notice. This marriage was a win-win, or so it seemed. But as with many of Henry's ventures, the devil was in the details. Catherine managed to give birth to several children, but heartbreakingly only one survived infancy, a daughter named Mary, born in 1516. And herein lay the rub. Henry desperately needed a male heir. A son was the golden ticket, the assurance that the Tudor line would continue without the chaos of a succession crisis. This wasn't just a personal obsession, it was a political necessity. The Tudor dynasty was still relatively new, and a clear line of succession was the best way to keep challengers at bay. By the 1520s, the lack of a male heir was gnawing at Henry like a particularly persistent gnat. And that's when Anne Boleyn entered the scene, a lady-in-waiting with wit, charm, and a talent for turning heads, especially Henry's. Anne wasn't just any lady, she was the sister of Mary Boleyn, one of Henry's former mistresses. Talk about keeping it in the family. But Anne was different. Henry was smitten, and the king's infatuation with Anne made him see his marriage to Catherine as an obstacle rather than an alliance. Enter the king's great matter, Henry's quest for an annulment so he could marry Anne. However, in a twist worthy of a Shakespearean play, the Pope, Clement VII, refused to grant it. The Pope was stuck in a political pickle himself, balancing between Catherine's nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, and the restless English king. Stuck between a rock and a hard place, he decided to stall, hoping Henry might lose interest or find another solution. Spoiler alert, Henry did neither. This is where Henry's cunning took centre stage. He didn't just want an annulment, he wanted a clean break with the papal authority that stood in his way. In a move that would reshape England forever, Henry decided to declare himself the head honcho of the Church of England. The Act of Supremacy in 1534 was Henry's mic-drop moment, severing England from the Roman Catholic Church and cutting through centuries of tradition like a hot knife through butter. No more meddling from Rome. Henry was now both king and spiritual leader. And to the victor went the spoils. The dissolution of the monasteries, which began in 1536, was like a royal garage sale, except with more abbeys and less Tupperware. Henry seized land and wealth from monasteries across the country, filling his coffers with the glittering proceeds. In the space of a few short years, about 800 religious houses were dismantled, and their riches repurposed to fund Henry's ambitions. It was a financial windfall and a political masterstroke, albeit one that left a lot of monks and nuns jobless and homeless. But let's not sugarcoat it. This was less about religious conviction and more about power and money. Henry's break with Rome wasn't driven by theological debate. It was driven by the need to secure his dynasty and, let's be honest, his desire to marry Anne Boleyn. And marry her he did in 1533, while Catherine was still very much alive and very much in England. As you might guess, this didn't sit well with many folks, especially those still loyal to the Catholic Church. But to Henry, the ends justified the means, and he wasted no time solidifying his new church's authority. The economic ramifications were enormous. Henry's coffers, previously stretched thin by wars and lavish spending, suddenly had a new influx of cash. Estimates suggest that the seizure of church lands and assets brought in around 1.3 million, a staggering sum in the 16th century. It was enough to keep the kingdom afloat and fund Henry's foreign wars and domestic projects without having to squeeze his subjects dry, at least for a little while. Henry's divorce from Catherine, however, was more than just a personal scandal. It was a seismic shift that sent shockwaves through Christendom. The Pope's refusal to grant an annulment wasn't just a papal power move, it was a line drawn in the sand. By defying the Pope, Henry set off a religious revolution that would see England swing between Catholicism and Protestantism over the next several decades, depending on which monarch sat on the throne. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Henry's reign was just getting started, and Anne Boleyn was about to find out that being queen was a lot more precarious than it looked. Anne's rise to power was as swift as it was scandalous. Marrying Henry wasn't just a personal victory, it was a political upheaval. But the honeymoon period was short-lived. Anne did give Henry a daughter, Elizabeth, in 1533, but like Catherine before her, she struggled to produce a male heir. And Henry's patience was wearing thinner than his receding hairline. By 1536, Anne was out of favour, and Henry's eye had already started wandering to Jane Seymour, one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting. When Anne failed to deliver a son, Henry's affection turned cold, and accusations of treason and adultery, some as flimsy as a wet paper bag, were levelled against her. Anne was arrested, tried, and executed within the year, marking one of the most notorious chapters in Henry's marital saga. The fallout from Anne's execution was profound. It cemented Henry's reputation as a ruthless, if not slightly unhinged ruler, willing to go to any lengths for his ambitions. Yet, despite the personal and political turmoil, Henry's break from the Catholic Church had set England on a new course. The land was reshaped, the political landscape altered, and Henry's control over his kingdom was more absolute than ever. But, as history would show, the king's quest for a male heir would continue to drive his decisions, keeping the court in a state of perpetual intrigue and instability. With each marriage, Henry became a king not just of England, but of legend, a larger-than-life figure whose decisions reverberated far beyond the boundaries of his own time. Stay tuned, because the saga of Henry VIII isn't just about weddings and wealth. It's a tale of power, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of legacy. Henry VIII's life was a tapestry of grandeur and chaos, and his military campaigns added an extra layer of complexity to that mix. If you thought his marital escapades were costly, wait until you hear about his penchant for warfare. Henry had this grand vision of himself as a warrior king, much like the heroes from the chivalric tales he adored. But in a twist reminiscent of a Shakespearean tragedy, his dreams of military glory often clashed spectacularly with fiscal realities. First up on Henry's hit list was France. In 1512, he launched his first campaign against the French, eager to reclaim ancestral lands and perhaps win a little personal glory. The medieval version of a midlife crisis, perhaps? This endeavour was part of the larger War of the League of Cambrai, a convoluted European conflict that was as much about shifting alliances as it was about territory. Henry's target was the city of Tournai, which, after a costly siege, he managed to capture in 1530. Victory? Sure, but at what cost? The campaign drained the English treasury faster than you can say financial ruin, costing a whopping 1 million, a staggering sum, especially when you consider the annual royal income hovered around 100,000. But Henry wasn't one to let a little thing like bankruptcy get in his way. His appetite for war was insatiable, and next he set his sights on Scotland. The Scots were allied with the French, and Henry was itching to teach them a lesson. Enter the Battle of Flodden in 1513, a brutal clash where the English forces, led by the Earl of Surrey, delivered a crushing defeat to the Scots, killing King James IV in the process. It was a victory for England, but it came with its own set of complications. Maintaining the northern border was as costly as it was strategically necessary, meaning the Crown's coffers were once again under siege. Henry's military ventures were like a game of chess played with real knights and pawns, and each move came with a price tag that would make any modern accountant weep. The king's ambition to be seen as a European powerhouse led to the construction of formidable coastal defences. These fortifications, known as the Device Forts, were built along the southern coast to protect against potential invasions from France and Spain. While they were a marvel of Tudor engineering, the forts also served as a grim reminder of Henry's paranoia and the financial strain of his constant wars. The construction of these defences demanded vast resources, with costs running into tens of thousands of pounds, money that England could scarcely afford. The economic strain of Henry's military campaigns was palpable. Taxes soared, and the king's relentless pursuit of glory often left his subjects groaning under the weight of his ambitions. The amicable grant of 1525 was a particularly infamous example. This forced loan was supposed to fund yet another campaign in France, but it was so unpopular that it sparked widespread resistance in East Anglia. It was a classic case of the monarch's reach exceeding his grasp, with the rebellion forcing Henry to cancel the tax and shelve his plans for invasion. It's a vivid reminder that even a king couldn't simply demand money without facing consequences. It's tempting to paint Henry as a swashbuckling hero charging into battle with armour gleaming in the sun. But the reality was a bit more like a lavish costume party where the guests were footing the bill. The cost of maintaining a standing army and navy, not to mention the logistics of moving troops across the Channel, was astronomical. The Tudor economy, while more robust than it had been in previous decades, simply wasn't equipped to handle such reckless expenditure without repercussions. The king's love for military escapades was rivaled only by his fondness for living large. His court was a place of opulence and excess, but this regal lifestyle was built on a foundation of fiscal instability. The dissolution of the monasteries had provided a temporary financial reprieve, but Henry's spending habits soon saw the treasury dwindling once more. It was like trying to fill a leaky bucket. No matter how much revenue came in, it never seemed to be enough. The irony of Henry's reign is that while he dreamed of being remembered as a great warrior king, many of his military ventures ended with little gain. The Treaty of London in 1518 was a peace agreement that briefly united the European powers, but it was more a diplomatic showpiece than a substantive achievement. And the infamous Field of the Cloth of Gold in 1520, a lavish meeting with Francis I of France, was less about forging alliances and more about who could outsplendour the other in a display of Renaissance bling. Despite, or perhaps because of, these grand gestures, Henry's legacy as a military leader is a mixed bag. Sure, he scored some victories, but his reign left England financially crippled and politically isolated at times. It's a myth as old as time, the idea of the noble, conquering king. But peel back the romantic veneer, and you find a ruler whose military ambitions were often as misguided as they were grandiose. As Henry's reign continued, the strain of his military campaigns began to show in more ways than one. The English populace bore the brunt of the economic burden, with heavy taxation becoming a constant thorn in their side. And yet, despite the growing discontent, Henry remained steadfast in his quest for martial glory. It was a pursuit that would continue to shape his reign and the future of England, setting the stage for a series of conflicts that would reverberate through history. So there you have it, a king with a thirst for battle, a nation struggling under the weight of his ambitions, and a legacy that is as much about what was lost as what was gained. Henry VIII may have fancied himself a warrior king, but the true fights, those for stability and prosperity, were often the ones left unfought. The saga of Henry's military exploits is far from over, so keep that popcorn ready. There's plenty more drama to come. Henry VIII's later years were like watching a slow-motion car crash with a soundtrack of lute music and clinking goblets. By the time the 1540s rolled around, the once vigorous king was more wheezy than warrior. His health was spiralling faster than a Tudor courtier's career prospects. And speaking of career prospects, his wives were learning that their job security was about as reliable as England's summer weather, unpredictable and often catastrophic. Let's talk about Henry's health. By his mid-40s, the king's legendary appetite had caught up with him. His waistline expanded faster than the national debt, and he was sporting a leg ulcer that was as persistent as a Tudor tax collector. This wasn't just any sore. It was a festering nightmare that might have made a lesser man reconsider his dietary habits. Yet Henry soldiered on, his once athletic frame now burdened by obesity and the gout that came with it. By the end of his life, he needed contraptions to hoist him around, a king reduced to being hauled about like a particularly regal sack of potatoes. But Henry's physical ailments were just the tip of the iceberg. His mental state was as precarious as his health. Paranoia was the order of the day, and his temper? Hotter than a summer joust. The king's court became a game of survival, with nobles tiptoeing around his moods like they were navigating a minefield. Henry's paranoia wasn't entirely unfounded, though. The Tudor court was rife with intrigue, and political backstabbing was practically a team sport. The stakes were high, one wrong move, and you'd find yourself on the wrong end of an axe. Let's not forget the revolving door of wives, each tailor-made to fit Henry's whims and desires, or so he thought. After Anne Boleyn's execution, Henry didn't waste time in the grieving department. Enter Jane Seymour, wife number 3. She was the one who finally delivered Henry's long-coveted male heir Edward in 1537. But even here, fate was not playing nice. Jane died shortly after childbirth, leaving Henry with the son he always wanted, but no one to share the victory dance with. Fast forward to 1540, and Henry was looking for love, or at least another politically advantageous match. Enter Anne of Cleves, wife number 4. Their union was as awkward as a blind date gone wrong. Henry, expecting a vision of beauty, reportedly found Anne as attractive as a cold mutton pie. The marriage was annulled faster than you can say diplomatic disaster, though Anne smartly negotiated a generous settlement and lived out her days comfortably. She was one of the few wives who lived to tell the tale, earning the title of the king's beloved sister. A small consolation, perhaps, but better than the alternative. Catherine Howard, wife number 5, wasn't so lucky. Young, vivacious, and a distant cousin of Anne Boleyn, Catherine caught Henry's eye and, unfortunately for her, his heart. But court life was fraught with peril, and Catherine's past was more colourful than a Tudor tapestry. When her indiscretions were exposed, Henry's wrath was swift and unforgiving. She was executed in 1542, her youthful vivacity no match for the king's growing paranoia and penchant for retribution. By the time wife number 6, Catherine Parr, entered the picture, Henry was less a lover and more a curmudgeonly husband with health issues galore. Catherine Parr was a pragmatic choice, more nursemaid than nuptial partner. She was smart, sensible, and knew how to keep her head both metaphorically and literally. She outlived Henry, providing a measure of stability in his final years, and ensuring his children were educated and prepared for the messy succession to come. Henry's policies during these tumultuous years were as erratic as his marital choices. His religious reforms had transformed England, but they left the nation religiously schizophrenic, torn between Catholic tradition and Protestant reform. And his economic policies? As stable as a three-legged stool in a windstorm. The dissolution of the monasteries might have filled the coffers briefly, but the long-term effects were less rosy. Inflation ran rampant, and the currency was debased to fund Henry's endless wars. The king's solution? Melt down the church's gold and silver, of course. Who needs financial stability when you can have an army of mercenaries? The social fabric of England was fraying at the seams. Henry's reign had seen the rise of a new class of gentry, beneficiaries of confiscated church lands. But this new wealth brought social upheaval. The traditional feudal system was giving way to a more modern economy, with all the growing pains and inequalities that entailed. Peasants found themselves squeezed by rising rents and failing harvests, leading to unrest and rebellions that Henry's regime had to quash with ever-increasing brutality. And then there was the Pilgrimage of Grace, a massive uprising in 1536 that saw thousands march and protest against Henry's religious reforms and economic policies. The king's response was classic. Henry, swift, decisive, and bloody. The rebellion was crushed, its leaders executed, and Henry's grip on power tightened. The message was clear, dissent would not be tolerated, and the king's will was law. In his later years, Henry's court was a place of fear and suspicion. Executions became more frequent, with former friends and allies finding themselves on the chopping block. The Duke of Norfolk, once a trusted adviser, fell from grace, a victim of the king's shifting moods and the ever-present threat of betrayal. Henry's reign of fear was like a dark cloud over England, casting a long shadow that would linger for generations. Yet, for all his faults, Henry VIII left an indelible mark on England. His reign was a turning point, a bridge between the medieval and the modern. He reshaped the nation's religious landscape, laying the groundwork for the Protestant Reformation that would define English identity for centuries. His economic and social policies, though often flawed, set the stage for the rise of a more centralized and powerful state. As Henry's health continued to decline, The king, who had once been the epitome of Renaissance vitality, became a symbol of its darker side. His later years were a testament to the corrosive nature of absolute power, a reminder that even the mightiest monarchs are not immune to the ravages of time and the consequences of their actions. The king's death in 1547 left England on the cusp of change. The young Edward VI would inherit a kingdom that was both a powerhouse and a powder keg. The legacy of Henry VIII was a complex tapestry, woven with threads of ambition, excess, and transformation. It was a legacy that would challenge and inspire his successors, shaping the destiny of a nation and leaving an indelible mark on history. But that, dear listener, is a tale for another time, as the saga of Henry VIII is far from over. As the curtain falls on Henry VIII's reign, we're left with a legacy as tangled as his marital history. Picture England in 1547. A kingdom teetering between medieval traditions and modern ambitions, its political landscape dotted with the ruins of monasteries and the echoes of executed queens. If Henry's life was a stage, then his legacy is the enduring drama that continues to captivate and confound historians and casual observers alike. Let's start with the political reshaping of England. Henry's decision to break from the Catholic Church was like setting off a series of fireworks, spectacular, explosive, and leaving a lasting impression. His act of supremacy in 1534 was more than a papal snub. It was a statement of sovereignty. By declaring himself the supreme head of the Church of England, Henry effectively told Rome, "I got this," and in doing so, set the stage for a nation that would define itself against the backdrop of continental Catholicism. This wasn't just a theological squabble. It was a power play that redefined English identity and governance. Henry's reign laid the groundwork for a Protestant England, even if his personal religious convictions were as changeable as the English weather. He swung between Catholic traditions and Protestant reforms with the enthusiasm of a man trying to have his cake and eat it too. The religious seesaw he set in motion would continue long after his death, influencing rulers from Elizabeth I to the English Civil War and beyond. Now, let's talk economics. Henry's reign was like a Tudor roller coaster, with financial peaks and troughs that could make even the most seasoned banker queasy. The dissolution of the monasteries was a financial windfall, sure, but also a catalyst for economic transformation. Approximately 800 religious houses fell under the royal hammer, their assets seized and redistributed. This redistribution of wealth didn't just pad Henry's coffers. It created a new class of gentry who bought up monastic lands. These new landowners were pivotal in transitioning England from a feudal economy to something resembling capitalism. Peasants were left navigating a new social hierarchy, finding themselves face to face with landlords more interested in profit margins than medieval obligations. This shift sowed the seeds for the economic changes that would define England's future, setting up a society that increasingly valued commerce and trade over feudal duty. Culturally, Henry fancied himself a Renaissance man. His court was a hotbed of artistic and intellectual activity, a Tudor think tank where music, art, and science thrived. He patronized luminaries like Hans Holbein, whose portraits of Henry have defined his image for centuries. You know the one? Henry standing wide-legged, cloaked in regal finery, as if he's just about to break into a Tudor power ballad. It's an image that screams authority and charisma, a carefully crafted piece of royal propaganda. But beyond the canvas, Henry's cultural legacy is more nuanced. His reign saw the introduction of the printing press to England, a technological marvel that democratized information and fueled the fires of religious reform. The dissemination of Protestant texts would challenge the Catholic stranglehold on knowledge, planting the seeds of an English Reformation that would outlast Henry himself. But what about the man behind the myths? The Henry who looms large in our collective imagination, striding through history with a turkey leg in one hand and a divorce decree in the other. The truth, as always, is more complex. Henry was both a visionary and a tyrant, a Renaissance prince with a medieval mindset. His larger-than-life persona was a carefully constructed facade, a mix of genuine charisma and ruthless ambition. He was a man who could charm and intimidate in equal measure, a king who wielded power with the finesse of a blacksmith's hammer. His reign was a study in contradictions, a man who sought control over his kingdom and his church, yet was often at the mercy of his own desires and insecurities. Henry's mythic status, as the quintessential English king, is as much a product of his own theatrics as it is of historical narrative. The 6 wives, the break with Rome, the iconic portraits, all these elements combine to create a story as compelling as any Shakespearean play. And while the romanticized version of Henry's life is entertaining, it's important to remember the human cost of his reign. His desire for a male heir led to the downfall of queens, the upheaval of the church, and the suffering of countless subjects caught in the crossfire of his ambitions. In assessing Henry's legacy, it's clear that his impact was both profound and paradoxical. He reshaped England, but not always for the better. His religious reforms were revolutionary, yet they left a nation divided. His economic policies paved the way for modernity, but at the expense of social stability. And his cultural contributions, while significant, cannot overshadow the tyrannical aspects of his rule. Henry VIII is remembered with both admiration and caution, a king who wielded power like a double-edged sword, cutting a path through history that is both celebrated and condemned. As the final curtain falls on Henry's reign, we're left with a legacy that's as multifaceted as the man himself. It's a legacy that challenges us to look beyond the myths and confront the realities of power, ambition, and the human condition. So, as you drift off to sleep with visions of Tudor grandeur and the echoes of history in your mind, remember, the past is never as distant as it seems, and the stories we tell about our kings and queens are as much about us as they are about them.